What's the stupidest argument you've ever gotten dragged into for way too long? Fighting with my brother about which fruit would win if they were sentient and could fight. My wife and I got into a shouting match as to whose friend's wedding we would attend if they scheduled them for the same weekend. Neither of those friends was even engaged yet, by the way. When I was 6, my friend and I stood facing each other, arguing about which hand was your left and which was your right. It took us about 5 minutes to realize that when standing opposite someone, your left is their right. I was living with a pal and we were getting on each other's nerves. One night we were arguing about whether to break spaghetti noodles in half. I finally said, "You cook yours your way, broken, and I'll cook mine unbroken." He took half of the spaghetti from the package and broke the noodles in half. He put them in boiling water and started stirring, while I stood there with the package. Mostly we glared at each other and then he reminded me to add my half to the pot. After I did it, he then thought of something. How are we gonna separate the long noodles from the short ones? We argued about the color of lobsters before being cooked. They only catch the red ones for eating. Duh. I had an ex argue with me over which would weigh more, a pound of bricks or a pound of feathers. We went back and forth forever while I tried to explain it to her. It didn't help when her mother chimed in with, "What about a pound of wet feathers?" The apple does not fall far from the tree, apparently. Oh no, her mother knew what she was doing. She tossed a grenade into the conversation and walked away. Way back when I was a phone service advisor for a credit card company, this lady called in confused as heck about a piece of mail we'd sent her. "I don't understand why you sent me a bill. I paid for the TV at the store with my card." "Yes, ma'am. Now, this is the bill for using your credit card." "But I used my credit card. Why would I have to pay again?" This went on for about a good hour. This poor excuse for an adult believed that a credit card was just an all-access pass to buy anything you wanted for free. That was a devastating job. A couple of years later, after being promoted, I was processing some emails to customers and received an email asking, "How do I email customer service?" You just did. My wife and I got into a screaming match because our broccoli wasn't growing as well as we thought it should, and clearly it was the other person's fault. Marriage, where the big things matter less and the little things are explosive. "Honey, I got fired." "That's okay, sweetie, we'll work through this together." "Honey, I moved the cereal to the left side of the pantry." "Are you freaking kidding me, Sean? The right side is clearly more easily accessible. I want a divorce!" This feels very true for a lot of relationships I've seen. Contrary to the saying, couples do in fact seem to not so much sweat the small stuff as go into a screaming frenzy about it, while remaining strong and united against major outside factors. The arguments you have where someone's venting at you about something infuriating and you even agree with them, but they're so mad that they want to argue with you about it, even though you agree with them and say yes throughout the conversation. My friend once tried to argue that Token, the black character in South Park, was named as such because black people are stereotypically always toking on Mary J. and Smack. I argued that it was because he was the token black character. My friend and I are both smokers. We were talking to my other friend who wasn't. The non-smoking friend was saying how bad smoking is and that we should both quit, and my smoking friend was arguing that smoking wasn't bad for you at all and he had no reason to quit. Now, at first, I thought he was joking, but no, he was deadly serious. I informed him he was wrong and that smoking does indeed kill people, and he got angry, screamed that we were lying, and then left and hasn't spoken to me since. This was like 6 years ago. No, he's not dead, he's just stupid. Not me, but my parents. They got into an argument about a little bit of sauce getting wasted because it came out too fast. My dad got angry about it because he just quit smoking, and they haven't spoken to each other for nearly 2 days now. My parents go on YouTube too, so I hope they see this and realize how stupid they're being. At the deli in grocery stores, you can buy these cherry peppers that are stuffed with prosciutto and cheese. Well, my dad and I love these things, and one day he bought a bunch of them. Then, through the course of a week, we ate them all. Except one, which sat in the container for 3 days uneaten. So, I ate it, and that's where I went wrong. 2 weeks went by before my dad would speak to me again, simply because I ate the last pepper before he did. My friend tooted. I asked him, "Did you just fart?" "No, I didn't." "Yes, you did." "No, I didn't, you freaking liar." Silence and a horrible smell. He was the only one with me in that room, and he is known for lying. "Oh, he didn't fart. He crapped himself." "Oh God, no." I once got in an argument with my roommate about who could raise the fastest duck. I was in a fraternity in college, and a sorority had invited us to participate in a rubber duck race fundraiser where the rubber ducks would float down a creek through campus and the person that bought the winning duck got a prize. Being the smart aleck I am, I asked the sorority president if I could enter a real duck. She didn't believe I would and said, "Yeah, sure, whatever, John." Later that night, my roommate and I got drunk and got in a heated debate over who could raise the faster duck. We woke up the next morning and headed to the nearest poultry farm where we each bought a duckling and raised it for the next month and a half. Their names were Cheese and Quackers, naturally. One day I came home to find all sorts of witchcraft spellbooks strewn about our counter. I asked him what they were, and he opened one up, grabbed my duck and started cursing it. Apparently he had gone to a palm reader to seek advice as a joke. We kept them in our fenced-in backyard, and the day after he had cursed my duck, a storm blew down our fence and our ducks escaped. I still blame the voodoo curse to this day. My duck, Quackers, easily would have won, and he had to resort to consulting the great beyond to ruin the entire race for both of us. In short, I had the faster duck, but I was foiled by a curse. My friend was convinced selfish was pronounced shellfish. I wrote the word out, sounded it out, and it was like I was saying the sun was blue. She just wouldn't have it. I don't know if she was screwing with me, but 2 or 3 years after that whole argument, we got in a whole different thing about her basically being a witch, and she says, "Sorry, I was being shellfish." I couldn't stay mad at that moron, and no, I'm not friends with Sean Connery. The argument he was defending was that if you go on someone's property, you're their property. Needless to say, he isn't very bright. He's locked up in my garage now. A woman I used to work with at a university got into an argument with me because she didn't believe the different races of humans were in fact the same species. Her final argument? "No, you're wrong. It's like whites and Native Americans are just like fish and dolphins. They're both in the ocean, but not the same species. Now do you get it?" No, not really. And not at all coincidentally, this was the worst group of co-workers I've ever had. A conversation between Jane, Bill, and I. Jane said, "It was about -40 outside in the winters." Bill asked, "Celsius or Fahrenheit?" So I piped in, "Oh, they're actually the same at -40. "Really?" said Jill. But no, Bill had to weigh in, "No, they aren't. You're talking crap." I said, "I'm 99% sure that they are the same at -40. I have a physics degree. You're an idiot." Bill then went on to reference my idiocy twice more over the course of the evening. Bill is a C-word, and no one likes to talk to him at parties. My friend's car battery died, and I suggested we push-start it. In Ireland, where the vast majority of cars are manual, every person in the country has once been beckoned to push-start a car. My friend said, "No, you can't push-start a car," and eventually started calling me an idiot and all sorts. She was so adamant that she was correct, she rang a mutual friend, a mechanic, and asked him the question, and he replied, "Of course you can push a car. Who the frick is saying you can't?" If she's like half the other people in these stories, I'm surprised you found out the truth, as most of these people would just hang up the phone and claim that the person agreed with them. Because there's a whole bunch of denial going on in these stories. When did people get so sure of themselves? Be curious, folks. My cousin said that her laptop was overheating and making a buzzing sound. Her friend piped up and commented that it was definitely a virus and she should take it to Geek Squad to have it removed. I said, "No, it's not a virus, it's probably your fan. Your fan is messed up, it's probably just dusty, just try cleaning that out." Note that I'm not an IT professional, but come on. This girl got righteously ticked off and told me that, no, it was a virus and she knows because she had the same issue with her laptop a few months ago and Geek Squad fixed it. This went back and forth a bit with me insisting that a virus doesn't affect the fan function. It was literally a hardware issue and she was talking to me like she couldn't believe how freaking stupid I was to not realize that a virus was making my cousin's laptop fan bog down. I finally explained to her how viruses work and she stomped her foot like a child and exploded that, "It's still a virus! The virus just deleted the file that runs the fan." I stared at her in disbelief. The file that runs the fan? What is that? Fan.exe? And she said, "Finally, you get it." She was so convinced that this was the case that my cousin, not noted for her critical thinking skills, believed her and said she'd just take the laptop in to have it checked and cleaned. Whatever, you want to pay out the butt to have some smug D-bag at Geek Squad, quote, "fix your laptop? It ain't my business." My friend said, "If you're driving 60 kilometers per hour, you're driving 1 kilometer per minute. I said, "No, you're driving almost 2 kilometers per minute." She snapped back, "Are you on smack or something?" You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. That human blood is blue before it hits oxygen, which is why your veins are blue. This led to 5th grade me poking myself with pins for hours to see if I could see it change from blue to red, while my brother kept me at it by telling me I wasn't doing it fast enough. God damn older brothers. I had an extended argument about whether or not Oregon Trail, the game, promoted communism. Like, this was 20 to 30 minutes of arguing. No, it doesn't. You would say that, you frickin' commie. That lake water is wetter than pool water. At my old job, I'd gone to get something off the printer, and when I got back to my desk, the director came over to me and pulled me into his office for a word. "Jenny, you need to make sure you're wearing shoes." "I am wearing shoes." "You weren't just then when you walked to the printer." Yes, I was." "No, you weren't. I saw that you weren't wearing shoes. Please make sure you're wearing shoes in my office. It's for health and safety." "I was wearing shoes." "No, you weren't." "Yes, I was. I was wearing shoes." "No, you weren't." "Why wouldn't I be wearing shoes? Why would I take off my shoes to go to the printer and then immediately put them back on when I get to my desk?" "Listen, just make sure you're wearing shoes at all times." I'm still baffled. I was wearing my freaking shoes. Oh, and here's a bonus, equally stupid argument. I was about 13, and me and my friend were watching TV at her house. An advert came on for Go Ahead biscuits. My friend said, "Those taste disgusting." "Yeah," I agreed. "Have you even tried them?" "Yes." I hadn't, but I didn't want to admit my lie. "No, you haven't." "Yes, I have." "All right then, what do they taste like?" "Disgusting." "You haven't even tried them." "Yes, I have." This angered her for some reason, so she slapped me and I slapped her back. "That was harder," she said, hitting me back harder, and I hit her back even harder. We spent the next 10 minutes hitting each other, progressively getting harder and more violent until we'd both fallen off the sofa and were full-on scrapping on the floor. There were tears, bruises, it was vicious. We didn't speak for about 2 hours after that until we eventually realized how ridiculous it all was and started laughing hysterically, and then we cried some more, and then we hugged. That may top the shoes argument, in fairness. One day, my girlfriend was a huge jerk all day, treating me like crap, yelling at me, and then finally saying, "Well, at least I didn't kiss another person while we were together." Dumbstruck, I asked her when that happened. She said, "Yesterday, at your friend's party." "That's weird. I went to school and then work and then came over and we went to bed." It was at this point that we realized it was a dream. Thanks, lady. A phone number I frequently call ends in 6272. I remember that by dialing NASA. Friends of mine vehemently disagreed and said that I was dialing the wrong number. The correct number was Napa. They're the same letters on those numbers on the keypad. My dad and I got into a yelling match about who tooted in the car. There were only 2 of us in the car as well. He tooted and he won using the "I'll ground you" trump card. My friend tried to put aluminium foil in the microwave, so I and literally every other person we asked, from friends to complete strangers, tried to explain that it wouldn't end well. They strongly believed, and I quote, "It just makes a little light show in the microwave." Some people have pointed out you can put it in for a short time, so I'll add some more context. My friend wanted to put food on top of aluminium foil and then put it in the microwave for 30 to 60 seconds, because at the time we had no plate and he thought aluminium foil would work. Any of the theoretical arguments my wife and I have from time to time. For example, we recently had an argument about how we'd furnish the non-existent, hypothetical 8-bedroom mansion we'd live in if we were billionaires. She wanted it to be full of antiques, and I wanted a stylish and futuristic minimalist theme. My college roommate and I didn't speak for 3 weeks because of an argument regarding toilet paper roll placement. It started off as a discussion, then an argument, then got to the point where he called my sister a working girl and I broke his wrist. Over. The toilet roll goes over. One of my colleagues thought that beef came from a pig. Are you fricking serious? You know, the hamburger has a lot to answer for in modern society. I swear it set back a lot of children and at least one adult on what animal goes in what meat. My mum's a super religious and superstitious person, so whenever I'd say something negative, we'd have to cancel it by saying, "Cancel, cancel, cancel." so that whatever bad thing we said wouldn't come true. So one day my sister did something stupid and 12-year-old me said, "You're stupid and I hope you die." My mum heard me from the other room and screamed at me, "Cancel it!" I said, "No." "Cancel it 3 times." "Fine. Cancel." I said 3 times, mister. "No." "Cancel it 2 more." "Cancel 1 more." Just a long pause from me. "Go to your room, you're grounded." "Cancel, cancel, cancel. I'm sorry, Mum, please." So yeah. I was a vegan for a few years and joined a club kinda organization. We'd swap recipes, talk about new products, and just hang out. Most of the people were pretty awesome, but like any group of people, some of them were a bit loony. There was this one girl who thought all animals could choose to be vegan. In her opinion, a wolf could just decide one day, "I want to avoid animal products." So she'd talk about wanting to go to speak to wild animals about the benefits of a vegan diet. I tried to tell her that animals really couldn't just go vegan, and she suggested that we feed them soy-based meat alternatives. We all tried to help her understand that animals can't, and she refused to believe us. She eventually stopped coming to the get-togethers. Thankfully, she refused to own pets, so no animals directly suffered from her beliefs. They just had to listen to her talk when she went out converting. I once argued with a girlfriend about whether or not we were going to have an argument. My girlfriend got angry at me because apparently I was mean to her in a dream. My friend and I got into an argument over whether chocolate would kill my dog. Of course, I was arguing that it would kill the dog, and he was arguing that it wouldn't. Eventually, he went home and I went to bed. Woke up to my dog vomiting violently under the bed. I could smell chocolate. That monumental idiot. I rushed my dog to the vet, and he needed to know how much chocolate my dog may have ingested. I called my friend, but he denied feeding my dog any. He had 80% dark chocolate when he was over. My other friend was in the car with him when I called. Apparently, he turned to her after hanging up the phone and said, I might have fed him a couple of squares to prove my point. My dog ended up in intensive care at the vet's for days. On an IV and carefully watched, he pulled through. The vet said that throwing up the chocolate so quickly undoubtedly saved his life. The stupid argument that almost cost my dog his life. Needless to say, I'm no longer friends with that jerk. My colleague and I spent half a day arguing about what would be best, burp confetti or fart glitter. Thank you, Internet, for giving us wonderful things. Men in tights vs. Princess Bride. Dude, that's like saying, do you want tacos or nachos tonight? Just have tacos with a side of nachos. One doesn't have to be the best. When I was about 14, I got in an argument with a classmate about whether or not the sun was burning. I said it wasn't because the definition of burning is a reaction with oxygen. Nuclear fusion is not burning. I couldn't convince him. His anger increased until he almost became violent, but I couldn't let this go. Some teacher overheard this argument and sent us to the physics teacher to solve the issue. Huh. Well, this sent me on an interesting learning journey. The narrator went on a bit of an internet binge and can say it all comes down to what your definition of a burn is. But in most strictly scientific descriptions, burning entails combustion, and most of the sun's heat is the product of a huge nuclear reaction. And even then, the narrator with his history degree doesn't feel like he's qualified enough to defend his viewpoint further. An "I'm breaking up with you" April Fool's joke led to the real thing, and I'm glad that it did. I once argued with a drunk guy who was telling me it took years for the light from the sun to reach the earth. I had a computer science teacher who didn't know anything about technology. We got into arguments because she insisted that a degree in creative writing would be the best way to prepare yourself for an IT job rather than a degree in computer science. 30 FPS vs. 60 FPS. My buddy and I smoked a bunch of green herb, then had an argument while watching the Food Network at 10 a.m. instead of going to our class. Is it touche or touchette? We frickin' had it out, telling each other why our version was correct, and more importantly, why the other party was gayer than 8 guys giving down-under kisses to 9 guys. We brawled in the living room for like 20 minutes. Oh sure, we could have just gone into the other room and Googled it, but these roasted potatoes with scallion and honey mustard vinaigrettes looked frickin' ridiculous. Could you believe Guy Fieri's fridge has a racing stripe? Man. Eventually, we decided who cares and put on Mario Kart. But I mean, secretly I knew he was wrong because, in my mind, of course it has a silent T, it's French is such a dumb argument. I miss college. When my daughter was 3, we were driving home together from the park and Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven came on the radio. She told me to change the station, it was a bad song, and I told her, no, it's the best song ever, you should listen to it. She then proceeded to tell me, I hate this song. I was like, you're 3, this is the best song ever, and you don't know anything about it. Oh my god, I'm arguing with a 3-year-old. We got home and she took a nap.
Students of Reddit, what's the story of the worst teacher you ever had? Had a science teacher that insisted cells were not made of atoms, and that therefore either leaves weren't alive or diamonds were. When I was at primary school, for ages I think around 7 or 8 till 11 in the UK, we had a class on human reproduction education. A kid asked the teacher about female eggs and how that works, only for her to scream at him that women do not have eggs and not to be stupid. Screw you, Brighton Junior School. This was about my class in the 9th grade. We were about 15 or 16 then. We had chemistry and we were learning about atoms and molecules. Almost everyone in class thought there was a molecule for everything, like a strawberry molecule for example. Then when I pointed out that they must have misunderstood it all, they acted like I was dumb or something. Look at stupid Brenda over here doesn't understand that there's a strawberry molecule. I had a math teacher who would leave the class to ask another teacher how to do certain math problems. Sometimes he'd be gone as long as 30 minutes during a 50-minute class period. Suffice to say, no one in that class learned much math. If it makes you feel any better, the teacher probably was given the class against his wishes. Math classes are often very hard to fill, particularly since they are a challenging set of skills for not much pay, compared to other opportunities. As such, schools sometimes ask unqualified people to teach math class because they need someone. I can confirm, I was supposed to teach math one year, and the school called me on a Friday before school started and informed me that they needed me to teach science instead, and if I could please come in over the weekend to set up my lab. Do you know how much prep should go into a successful year of science? You basically should set up your curriculum in advance, plan out all the lab exercises, lobby your school for the money, and order all the supplies. You can't just walk in and wing a year of science with 130 kids when you've never taught the subject before. As you can tell, I'm not bitter at all. All of these stories remind me of how bad substitute teachers are. Like, I think my old high school just got random people off the streets to teach. I once had a sub who wore doctor's hairnets over his shoes and asked me what I wanted to be in life. When I said I wanted to make films, he laughed in my face and said that's not happening. Education is a joke in the States. My English lit professor was late to class every day. She was clearly on substances. On top of that, she didn't even shower. Her hair was matted, and she was so rude. She gave us homework and never took it up or graded it, and then would show up and say it's test day with no warning. I had to drop the class after I failed the first test. I believe most of the class dropped after that exam as well, and she didn't come back next semester. I mean, if she was on substances, then clearly the English class was pretty lit. One time while taking an exam in my Calculus 2 class, I got a random bloody nose that dripped right onto the test. After explaining what happened, my teacher said if I leave the room to go clean up, I wouldn't be able to retake the test. My options were to grab another test and start over halfway through without being able to copy my previous answers, or leave and fail the exam. I walked out of the classroom and withdrew before I even got to my car. You should have bled all over the test and handed it in. And with that evidence, if they kept it, went to the dean or someone else in administration. I have steady nosebleeds of up to a minute every now and then, and that's while lying down. I honestly couldn't take the chance of continuing to write while I bled for just a gotcha moment with a jerk teacher. FYI, as a nosebleeder myself, don't lay down when you got one. In case you didn't know, tilting your head back is also a lie. Both things just make it worse. This is about my Welsh professor. She assigned textbooks that were out of print, couldn't explain anything to save her life, responded to questions by repeating herself, and her syllabus was just header info and a single line that said, "The purpose of this class is to learn Welsh." In the 2nd grade, had a cool girl named Deja in my class. Our class made a joke where we'd say Deja and then boo in a loud and deep voice. The teacher was super ticked off and took Deja's bag, the rectangular one with the 2 metal bars on the back, and slammed it against her back. I heard the most blood-curdling scream of all time, and the whole class just fell silent. I don't know what happened to the teacher since that was near the end of the year and I moved away after that school year ended, for unrelated purposes. The teacher physically assaulted Deja because y'all made a joke about her name? Holy freak. Yeah, I felt so bad for Deja, and the memory keeps coming back to me sometimes. I don't know why I think about it, I just do. Hearing that story made me really think that I probably would have taken part in that joke, because saying deja vu sounds kinda cool. But I could see how it would suck if you didn't like the joke. I was once humiliated by my teacher because the guy I had a crush on was in another class, came into our classroom to ask my teacher something. A lot of my classmates started giggling, and one of them called my name for several desks away, as if I possibly didn't notice that my crush had entered the room. I was the one that ended up getting in trouble, and the teacher threatened to send me into my crush's class and have everyone laugh at me, even though I hadn't said or done anything besides go bright red. My bad for having friends who knew I liked a boy, I guess. Not saying what happened was right, but I'm embarrassed as freak by everyone's behavior. I wouldn't wish any aspect of this situation on anybody, but God, that teacher hated me. This was a gym teacher. The other kids would often bully me and sometimes beat me up. She would only intervene if I fought back, and that was to punish me and me alone. I went to the guidance counselor one time after getting kicked out and told him what happened. He called her and she said I was the one attacking them and they did nothing, since she was the teacher and I was the student. You can guess who the guidance counselor believed. This was my entire elementary school life. I could have 6 jerks pushing me around, calling me names, hitting me, trying to pants me, etc. That's all fine. Throw one punch and break their nose, detention for a week. Literally had the exact same thing happen to me as well. I would get ISS, in-school suspension, and the other girl would get nothing. I am also a girl, but I was a very tall 12-year-old. So whenever I would fight back, they would assume I caused more damage, even though I was the one being picked on and did not start the fight and was only defending myself. Years later, my mom said they wanted to permanently suspend me, but she threatened to sue them since they admitted to her that I was the one being bullied and couldn't do anything about it in writing. Good thing though is the ISS teacher was very nice to me and would let me do whatever I wanted as long as I did all my homework and stayed quiet. Got a lot of good quality reading done. I had the opposite effect with teachers in school. Every time I was about to get into a fight, one magically appeared. I remembered one time I was in gym and this kid was walking up to me, ready to fight me, and my math teacher showed up out of nowhere and stopped us. It's like she had instant transmission. A teacher once told me that sand was a liquid because you could pour it. I then raised my hand and told her that if you had enough big containers, you could pour bowling balls. The class laughed, and about 10 minutes later I sneezed. She thought I said BS and sent me to the principal's office. The worst teacher I ever had was my shop/gym teacher in high school. He would not do anything at all. I was able to smoke in shop class and in gym as long as I was outside running laps or something. I never once heard him tell anyone about safety measures when using shop equipment. A few people got hurt, and one actually lost half a thumb, but the worst thing he ever did was hire some of the grade 9 and grade 10 girls to babysit for him and his wife. He would leave his wife at the bar and go home to check on the kids, and was eventually caught hooking up with one of them. After a police investigation, they found a ton of homemade content on his laptop of him hooking up with these girls. Last I heard, he went to jail for life. This was all in a town of less than 300 people. Similar thing happened to a hall monitor I knew. Dude went on to be a coach at another school and was apparently doing pretty well. Threw it all away because he started to date a student. What an idiot. In the 5th grade, I had a teacher who disliked me because I was bullied a lot and she had to take care of it and talk to my parents a lot. One day I was playing kickball and got borderline assaulted by some kids, and she saw, came over, and let them go inside. She looked at me covered in dirt and said, "Don't go telling your dad about this." Next day, my dad went into the school and had a very long talk with this teacher and the principal. I'm pretty sure she was hoping the school year would end sooner. Damn, I had the same teacher in the same grade who would never stop screaming at one student named Nate. I ended up kind of becoming friends with him, but didn't see him much after 7th grade. It got to the point where it seemed like she would go out of her way to find some reason to scream at him. She even screamed at him when some student smuggled a staple gun into the lunchroom and began firing it at Nate, claiming he was doing horseplay or something. The kid with the staple gun got away scot-free. Same kid also hit me with the rubber band next year until I almost cursed. Luckily, my teacher was really friendly and said, "Well, I would have too. That really hurts." I had a computer science teacher who didn't really teach the class. First day of school, he stood up and said, "I'm going to be honest with you guys. We're going to be learning this material together." He then pushed us all into online code camps. The beginning of every class, he also spent about the first 20 minutes going over anything under the sun except for programming. If your phone went off at any point during class, he said that you had to buy the entire class donuts, but he was exempt from this rule. My programming teacher also had similar teaching strategies. The first day he said, "You guys will just be learning on codes and I'm gonna monitor you." He then proceeded to play the Winnie the Pooh baseball video game every class, even promising kids A's if they could beat it on the hardest difficulty, as the rest of us struggled to actually program. First off, where can I play Winnie the Pooh baseball, because I always hear about that game? And secondly, my economics teacher in college had the same rule about donuts. His phone actually went off once and the whole class was like, "Ooh," and he bought us donuts the next class. It was awesome. Some crazy substitute we had for geography hit the computer monitor to the floor because of a fly. It landed beside me and I nudged it off with my paper. My elbow knocked the dictionary off the table and I was, and I quote, "isolated from class for throwing a dictionary across the room." I was pissed off. When I was in kindergarten, my first teacher got pregnant, so she had to take maternity leave. She then got replaced with a substitute teacher to teach my class for the rest of the school year. She was very strict and she was not very nice. I had issues with her, but I was a very good student, quiet and to myself. One day I asked her that I had to use the bathroom, but she refused to let me go. I really had to go, but ended up peeing myself. I remember going to the nurse and they called my mom. My mom went to the school and had a meeting with the teacher, the principal, and someone else. 2 days later, that teacher was fired. At least she didn't do the, "I don't know, can you?" bit when you asked to go to the bathroom. Every time a teacher did that, I wish I peed myself. I remember my 4th grade teacher, Mrs. Doge, being super strict. She was pregnant and took maternity leave. The substitute was the nicest teacher ever, and she was appalled that Mrs. Doge had never read us a single book. When I was in the 9th grade, the school I went to could not afford enough books for everyone in the English classes to have a copy to take home. They only had like 30 copies and they had like 4 classes of 25 students. So what they did was have us read in class. But rather than have each of us read to ourselves, the teacher read to us. I think this was because they wanted the entire class to be at the same place in the book. This was the 9th grade. It was a little insulting, in my opinion, to have the teacher read to us. The teacher quickly realized that it's no fun reading the same chapter to 25 students 4 times a day. So she brought a tape recorder and would record herself reading to the first class. The 3 other classes got to sit there and listen to the recording of her reading the chapter while she sat at her desk doing God knows what. I've never been one of those who liked wasting time, so I went to the library and checked out a copy of whatever book we were reading and would read it at home. I would finish it in a couple of nights, whereas it would take a week or more to have it read to us in class. The English class was my second to last class of the day, so I would use that time to do homework from my other classes that day. Ideally, not to have any work to do after school. An English teacher I had in high school asked the class to spend half of the class in the library, finding a love poem. I chose Sonnet 130 by Shakespeare. It's not your standard love poem. It says nothing nice about the lady until the very end. She failed me on the project. The very next project was to choose a poem that described our general feelings around the time. I chose a poem from the existentialists. I don't recall exactly which one, but it was about bad thoughts, if you catch my drift. Again, I failed the project. I never forgot her response after I read it aloud. "Why would you choose something so awful and sad?" A girl in the class said, "Maybe that's how he feels." She sent me to the principal's office for punishment. By the end of that year, I was in the mental hospital for acting on those bad thoughts. I was there for 3 months. I feel bad for the OP in this story. I had an English teacher that failed me because I used the words "explosions in the sky" for a poem, and she told me I plagiarized because that was the name of a band. My next poem was about how my English teacher sucked, and I got a passing grade. I was so confused. In middle school, I'm in college now, I had the displeasure of experiencing a married math/humanities teacher duo who were horrible people and took their relationship issues out on their students. The math teacher was just extremely freaking weird and would go on strange rants, scream, and clip her toenails in class, and clip her nails in class. This happened during a test once. The only sound that could be heard was pencil scratching and the clipping of her nails. I still remember it and shudder. She also made up ridiculously hard to follow technical rules about formatting that would ruin your grade and even put you in detention if you didn't follow them correctly, like drawing the exact margins on homework, boxing answers, and getting all of your work signed by a parent. I was a good kid, but went to detention for the first time that year. Eventually, half the class was in and out of detention every week. Worst of all, she seemed to single out her students to torment at random. I, a small, shy, emo Hispanic girl, was her favorite target. I remember her once yelling at me in class to the point of making me cry for fidgeting with my eraser. She described it as playing with dirt. She brought it up relentlessly in class for a month, calling me dirty in front of my classmates. The worst thing is that when she saw my friend eating a cookie in the hall, for some reason, she absolutely flipped her lid and tried to force her to spit the cookie into her hand because eating in the hall was not allowed, a rule that was never enforced. My friend apologized but naturally refused, swallowing the cookie that was already in her mouth, and thought that was that. The teacher continued to scream at her, got her detention, and tried to get her suspended. Her husband was the humanities teacher. Think history, current events, and social studies. He was, to put it lightly, a blatant racist. When we talked about the Holocaust or the slave trade, he would ham-fistedly point out the Jewish or black kids in the class and basically be like, just like your ancestors, and keep bringing up the kids as examples despite clearly making them uncomfortable. This wasn't even the most blatantly offensive part. During parent-teacher conferences, he literally told my mom, an immigrant, and myself to our faces that I was late and often valued socialization over hard work because I was a Latina. He said something along the lines of, just because it's okay in your culture doesn't make it okay here. I taught in Costa Rica once. I should know. I was a meticulous worker who would chat with friends here and there, but not excessively, which of course wasn't the most messed up part about his statement. Me and my mother were speechless, and she didn't say anything, but there was tears in her eyes, and she was understandably mortified and angry. His words hurt me, but it hurt most of all to see her like that and feel so helpless. They both continuously berated me in class and gave me unreasonably bad grades. I was a quiet, extremely shy, hardworking kid, known for being a bit of a goody two-shoes. Before their classes, I never had any academic difficulty, and humanities was my favorite subject. After a while, I shrunk completely. I stopped trying in both of their classes. I was so ashamed, frustrated, and scared of them. My already low self-esteem dropped considerably, and my anxiety in the class situations worsened. Although I consider myself to be quite intelligent and was able to still get A's after their classes, all throughout high school, I retained any aversion to speaking to my teachers and contributing in class, causing my academic life to suffer quite a bit. So Mr. and Mrs. Penn, F you, and I'm glad you got fired and divorced. I hated teachers like this, and being a kid who spoke up, I often got in trouble. I once told my film teacher that he was ruining people's projects with his input. For example, one kid had this dramatic film that was supposed to end with a murder scene. Our teacher thought it would be better if the guy was tied up and had syrup poured on him. It was the stupidest idea ever. Oh, and he loved adding fart jokes to everything. My second grade teacher was Sister Bridget. She didn't like me at all. One day I was feeling ill, and I asked to use the restroom. She told me I was lying, as she tried to tell me why I was a liar, which led me to vomit all over her shoes. Maybe it was a holy vomit. Okay, maybe not the worst teacher, but definitely the strangest. Mr. Pratt. He was a substitute teacher I had in high school in the 90s. Inner city school, he was an older black dude with a loud mouth. There were a lot of jerk students, though, who always mouthed back to every teacher, which made learning difficult. Mr. Pratt had an odd choice when responding to these kids. Imagine a well-dressed but definitely urban-sounding substitute who, when a student tried to act out, would pull out a freaking puppet, obviously custom-made and looked just like him, suit and all, out of his desk. He would then start berating the student via the puppet. The puppet was called Pratt Daddy, by the way. He would make the student talk to the puppet and apologize. Most didn't. They were laughing and tried to talk over Pratt Daddy, in which case Pratt Daddy, the puppet, would kick them out of class and lock the door. Then the puppet went back into the desk drawer and Mr. Pratt continued his lessons. It was odd. I feel like that is something you would have seen on a sitcom. But Pratt Daddy would have probably hit the students with a stick. My former tutor for year 9, also the art teacher, she refused to take action when somebody created a Snapchat account under my name and sent unclothed images to dozens of people around my school. Shortly after this, I got into a fight because a guy was still pissed about the Snapchat situation and punched me in the jaw when I had a retainer. From this, she decided to secretly send loads of emails to my mother suggesting that I, more than likely, have autism. I have since basically been forced into getting checked up on, only for doctors to confirm that I don't have enough symptoms for a diagnosis. She treated me really poorly in the art lessons and did very little to get involved with me when I reported or got witness being bullied.
Teachers, what was the best excuse for being late that turned out to be true? Story time. I was the only high schooler on our bus one winter. The other detail important to this story is that we had the oldest model bus that wasn't in the best mechanical shape. It had one of those mechanically operated doors, it would shoot out a plume of black smoke every time it started, and just looked much less fancy than all the other buses the school had. Anyway, one winter it was so cold that the diesel engine stopped working. The bus driver said the cold made the diesel in the lines gel up. I have no idea if that's accurate, but either way the bus wouldn't start. Fortunately, we were only 5 miles from the school and all the kids had been picked up already, so they just radioed another newer bus to loop back around and pick us up. The bus driver radioed the elementary school but completely forgot to let the high school know. So I show up to class and the teacher asks why I was late. I said, the cold caused the fuel lines to gel up in the school bus, repeating exactly what the bus driver told us. But I was the only high schooler on that bus, so no other students were there to back up my story. The teacher didn't believe me, and instead of just calling the main office to verify the story, she mocked me in front of the whole class saying, "It's not possible for fuel to freeze in the cold," and everyone in the class agreed with her, saying that I was a bad liar and laughed at how dumb my story was. Ultimately, the office did let her know about the bus after she tried giving me a detention, but the embarrassment is still there and she never gave me an apology. I don't really blame a lot of teachers for being skeptical about excuses kids make for being late and stuff, but the fact that they didn't even bother to check if there was a situation with the bus is really unreasonable. Also, yeah, apparently fuel lines can start to freeze up and everything, or the fuel inside the lines can freeze up if it's about minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. I was the kid. Physics, 11th grade. The day prior to this day, my neighbor passed away and her son was a friend of mine and also in this class. Terribly long story, but it was a self-deletion by hanging, and I was the one who found her. I had nightmares all night and skipped the first half of school the next day. When my physics teacher saw me later, she asked me where I was that morning. Before I could explain, she said, "That friend was looking for you and concerned. He seemed more worried than he should have been and was a little upset about you not being there. The guy's mom died, but he still went to class and didn't tell anyone, but was worried about me. I couldn't tell her what had happened at that point, so I just said I overslept." Well, first of all, that's traumatizing. Second of all, it's nice that he didn't say anything when his friend obviously didn't want to say anything quite yet. And third of all, there aren't many of these from the perspective of actual teachers that I could find, so I expect a lot of I was the kid in these. Obligatory not a teacher, but I am an admin in a music school. I had a mom frantically call me and let me know her daughter would probably be late or miss their guitar lesson in a couple hours because she couldn't find the kid. I was just kind of okay, well, I will let her teacher know. Got another call about an hour later from the same mom. She found her kid, but apparently the daughter went to a friend's house and decided to dye her hair green? They lived pretty close by, so I did let them know they could still come in for their lesson. Mom said she would call me back and let me know in a minute or two. Never called back. Her daughter showed up for her lesson about 5 minutes late with this bright green coiffure. I gotta admit it looked rad as heck, but also kind of a confusing thing to be an audience to the build-up. I don't know about the rest of you, maybe it's just me, but I'm kinda over the whole unnaturally dyed hair look. It's cool, I don't mind it, but I know so many people still who are oh my god, blue hair, oh! And I'm dude, are you is it 2010 still? Are you still in love with Ramona Flowers from Scott Pilgrim? One of my friends was training for cross-country on a weekend once and she was hit by a pickup truck that ran a stop sign. She flew over the top of it and broke both her kneecaps. The pickup truck drove off. She said she can't remember any of the events that happened immediately afterwards, but the police report said that a bystander pulled over to help, and when they asked if she was alright, she just kept repeating a bunch of letters and numbers over and over, not even saying anything else except JHP 887, JHP 887, JHP 887, JHP 887. Just constantly saying it like she was in some manic state. Eventually, after the police had already been called, the dude who pulled over to help realized that those were the license plate numbers and wrote them down. There was no security footage of it, and her being able to glance at the plates was the only reason they were able to track down the truck that hit her. To this day, that is the single most awesome thing that she's ever done. I can't imagine flying over the top of a truck and having enough mental capacity in that moment to look at the license plate and memorize it while having two knees that don't have functioning kneecaps. I wish there was a silver lining to this story, but she had to have tons of surgery and to this day has some bad knees and can't really run like she used to. Not to mention the guy they tracked down didn't have any insurance and was just an elderly man who had pretty severe dementia and panicked after hitting her, so they didn't even press charges. Because of the way that they told this one, it doesn't really seem to fit in this topic. I have to commend the woman, first of all, for being able to memorize the license plate through the shock and the pain that they were probably enduring in the moment. And I guess they missed the cross-country race in the end, I assume, so I guess it counts. I apologize that I'm writing this on mobile, so there might be errors. I'm an English professor, and one year a pretty good student showed up without one of his two major term papers. He explained that his safe had been stolen by a contractor who was working on their house. His laptop was in the safe, and that's where his paper was. I genuinely believe him because he is being a really good student. Then, over the next few weeks, he started to show up to class looking very tired. He said that he was on a hunt for the person who stole his safe, and he was spending late nights with his cousin driving around looking for the guy because they knew his van. Now the student and his cousin were both recently back from tours in Iraq and had seen combat experience. They wanted to find the guy to beat the tar out of him and get the safe back because his wife's wedding ring was in the safe as well as a bunch of cash. He rewrote the paper and turned it in apologetically that it wasn't up to his usual quality, but he still kept coming to class looking like he hadn't slept. After a little while, he came in very happy to my office and he reported that he found the guy after a long search that involved breaking into a drug den, shaking people down with baseball bats, and even bribing some prostitutes. He said that they found the guy's van at a Taco Bell after getting a tip from a prostitute, and they cornered him and waited for the police to come. I read in the news that he had in fact done a citizen's arrest and stopped the guy at a Taco Bell, and that they ended up calling in the Secret Service because he used the cash that he stole from the safe to buy a bunch of counterfeiting equipment. Secret Service apparently investigate counterfeiting, so the whole investigation happened because this guy, who I dubbed the White Shaft, tracked the scumbag down through the bad side of town late at night to get a wedding ring, some cash, and his research paper back. It all turned out to be true. He got the ring and the laptop back. I gladly accepted his original paper, and it got a much higher grade than the rewrite. A couple people asked for more details, so here are a few more. I can't recall the year this happened, but it was the height of the war with the US and Iraq. My student had enrolled in the army right after 9/11 on the same day as his cousin. They were both just out of high school and enrolled due to patriotism and frustration. According to him, when he started his vigilante spree, he actually went inside of a house used by a drug addict to try and find the guy. They shook the house down with baseball bats and forced everyone out into the street. When the cops showed up, they told my students how dangerous this was and not to do it again. They then gave him their card and said, "But call us if you do." They shook down at least 2 other drug dens, and the same cop was waiting outside both times to arrest people, since he didn't need to get a search warrant as everyone was outside now at the point of 2 baseball bats. I told my student about how dangerous this all was, and he was very John Wick about getting his wife's wedding ring back. Also, I tried to find a link to the story, but it was a small story and the Googles aren't being very helpful, especially since I can't remember the year. What a nerd, going through all that trouble to get a good grade. No, I'm joking, obviously. That story is awesome, and if there was a link they could have supplied to an article, I would have been so happy. Not a teacher, but My senior year of high school, they were doing construction on the building, and so part of it was completely closed. To make up for the lack of space, there was a vocational school nearby in the district that let us use the extra rooms they did not use. To get to the other school, you could get on a bus, or if your last class of the day was at the vocational school, you could drive over there. I was driving a friend and myself over to the same English class. Traffic gets pretty stop and go at this time, as there's a lot of buses and students all going to the same place. The kid behind me wasn't paying attention during one of the stop moments and rear-ended me. Now it was stop and go traffic, so it wasn't like any of us were going fast. It was really just a bump. Still, everyone got out to see the damage and make sure everyone was okay. We were all fine. We both had piece of crap cars. We both decided that nothing was significant. May as well get back into the line of traffic and get to class. The kid who hit me was also in the same English class. My friend and I walked into class late. The teacher was known for being a stickler. Very snidely says, "You two better have a good reason for being tardy." My friend laughs and I respond, "Yeah, other classmates just rear-ended us on the way here. You can confirm with him when he gets here." So a minute later he rushes in saying, "Sorry I'm tardy, I hit CM Hooley and friend." Rest of class laughs, stern teacher makes us all get down to business, the end.
I always say you should treat teachers right, but it's undeniable that either some teachers are waiting for you to slip up or actively want to get you in trouble. I mean, I once had a teacher that said to me after I questioned her teaching method, "I'm going to make your life a living hell," took me outside away from the class and said that to my face. I had a student, player our NCAA Top 25 football team, be late to a college midterm. As a note, we are in a metropolitan area. Emails me and goes, "I fully understand you think this is going to be a lie, but I found the guy unconscious in his car. Had to stop and call 911. Be there soon." This was one where it was so wild I couldn't fathom it being fake on some level. I was sitting there proctoring and thinking how I was going to have to request a police report to verify. But the kicker is the guy made it to class and finished the exam on time, and got an A from what I recall.
Good Lord, he a football player, got a little big smart brain in that head of his, and he's a moral person. My God, he sounds like the whole package. TLDR, student shows up to class with a head injury with a note to prove it. Chooses not to go home because he doesn't want to miss the activity for that day. I teach a college freshman paper writing class. Over the course of the semester, we have 2 workshop sessions where students bring in their drafts and critique each other's draft papers. Each one counts for 5% of the grade, and missing it unexcused means forfeiting that 5%. An excused absence makes the other workshop session worth 10% of the grade. Anyway, during the first workshop session, there was a student who I did not expect to be absent at all, but 60 minutes into the class, hadn't shown up. Class is 90 minutes long. Normally, I wouldn't allow someone to come in that late, especially to a workshop session. However, he had the best excuse. He gives me this letter from a doctor at the PE department. Turns out that he had judo for PE that morning. He was paired up with a more experienced sparring partner who flipped him upside down. He landed on his head, I think. On the symptoms, the note read that he had temporary memory loss and a possible concussion. Under recommendations, it said that he should go home. I asked him why he didn't go home. He said that he didn't want to deal with the complications of missing workshop. I should note that my class was on the 5th floor of a building with no elevators and high ceilings, so he had already gone up 4 flights of stairs. I didn't want to waste his effort, so I let him push through. He mentioned that he couldn't remember where he put his pen, needed to write comments on classmates' drafts, so I begged to one of his poor classmates to lend him one. Afterwards, I went to our faculty room and told them about it. They all called BS, and I showed them the note, which completely changed their tone. They all started accusing me of creating a pressuring classroom environment. Half joking, I think. Just want to clarify the timeline because I realize it might have caused some concern. The judo incident happened in the morning around 9 or 10 a.m. My class was from 4 to 5:30, with the student arriving 5-ish. In the time between the incident and the student arriving late to my class, he was able to rest, regained his memories, although possibly not totally since again he couldn't find his pen, was cleared from having a concussion by a doctor. The doctor wrote the note to explain why he would miss classes because
because the recommendation was that he go straight home, which would mean taking public transport for about an hour. He was still wearing the judo pants and he still did a good job critiquing his classmates' work, by the way. I once judo through a dude, he poured milkshake all over my friend, called me a homophobic slur, and tried to punch me in the face, and I totally emasculated him in front of his girlfriend. That was in early high school, 2007, 2008. Not a teacher, but when I was in elementary school, I remember an incident where I had a homework sheet I'd taken home to complete. I can't remember what the subject was. I do remember I spent most of my evening after dinner sitting at the table with my dad trying to complete it. This was torture. For some reason, my dad and I never connected in a learning environment. He would dictate things to me and expect me to get it, but he really struggled to walk me through the process needed for me to understand it. So after many hours of yelling and arguing and tears and being absolutely miserable, I finished the damn worksheet, set it down and went to bed. In the morning, I woke up to discover a critical error with my homework. When I set it down to get ready for bed, I had set it on top of the bird cage instead of on top of the shelf next to it. I don't know why I thought to do this instead of putting it on the shelf. I can only assume I thought flat surface good in my poor tired brain. My cockatiel was greatly offended by this mysterious new object on top of its home and had spent most of the night shredding my worksheet to pieces. I took the remains with me to school, and when they asked us to hand in the assignments, I kinda just looked at my teacher with a completely defeated expression on my face and uttered the words, my bird ate my homework. The uproar of laughter from the class was defeating. My teacher took the sheet from me and examined it carefully, then sighed as he tells me, well, it looks like you tore this page apart with a hole punch. Come see me after class. I didn't expect to be accused of lying, so in my shock, I started arguing with him. No, really, my bird ate my homework, which only spurred the laughter from the class further. I didn't know what else to do. Did you ever get that frog in your throat feeling as a kid, where your voice just seizes up and you can't manage to squeeze out any sound no matter how you might try? For years afterwards, I'd get bullies making stupid "did your bird eat your homework again" jokes from kids that had been in that class. Adult me thinks it's kind of funny. I have pushed myself, been pushed by my dad so hard just to complete that damn assignment, only to have it ruined, be accused of lying, and be embarrassed and teased for the situation. Poor 7-year-old Lanko just wasn't prepared for life yet, you know?
While I've never had a pet eat my homework, I have had my brother drink a liquid science assignment that I had in primary school, but I don't believe I was ever accused of lying about him drinking it, so that kind of turned out well for me.
Monday, my astronomy professor walked in unusually late. He was out of breath and apologized and said, "I swear I'm late for a good reason," and went on to inform us about Betelgeuse, a star that has been dimming more than usual and has been debated between astronomers as to what this dimming business is all about. Some are saying maybe that's just what it does, and others are saying maybe it could go supernova. Well then, he says in what felt like a single breath, so I read an article that came out today, and some researchers suggested that Betelgeuse could be spewing out enough matter to make clouds that are interfering with how much light makes it to us. But they hadn't looked at the observatory data that corresponds to that phenomenon. So I looked over the data and found out that they were wrong, and it can't be a cloud that's causing the dimming. So I was writing to them to tell them their hypothesis was incorrect and to show them the math and data that reaches that conclusion. And he had this smile on his face like he was so proud of himself. Ended it with, "So now y'all are the first to know that it is definitely not a cloud."
I don't know about the rest of y'all, and maybe this is just my personal experience, my personal opinion, but science teachers are the most passionate about their work, I find, and in turn, that makes them the cutest, in my opinion.
I teach at a community college on the Texas coast. We reopened as soon as possible after Harvey, and the excuses were insane. Someone stole our door/air conditioner/tires, and we're waiting on the police. That could take a while. Travel was hazardous in some areas. Our hot water heater exploded and the shower completely melted. We just got back into our house and it's full of snakes and seagulls. My grandmother is missing. Some teachers complained and adopted stricter attendance policies, but several of my students were homeless or living without electricity or running water water and still taking time to stay in communication. So I ditched my attendance policy entirely and basically said, I'm going to be here regardless. If you can be here, great. If not, let me know you're okay as soon as you can and I'll count you present and tell you what we went over in class. I'm proud to say that almost all my students finished the semester and most did very well in their exams. I teach psychology and I start the semester with writing assignment on stress. It gives me insight into the lives of my students, so I'm not often completely floored by odd excuses.
Sounds like a pretty rad, understanding individual.
Not a teacher, but I hear a lot of tardy excuses. My work is pretty flexible with schedules. We let people write their own work hours with start times. You can change your schedule on a whim so long as you put in 80 hours during the pay period, 2 weeks. So I, being the supervisor, had to have them check in with me when they arrived. It was so stupid. My guys have always been honest about when they were late and made up the time without question. Still, we had a couple months of them checking in on arrival. Even if someone was 1 minute late, I was required to document the reason and provide a course of action. I said screw that and put up a board for people to write in their times, excuse, and when they plan on making up the time. The excuse field was always there, so people would write in something every day. Coffee was still good to waste. Recovering from taco last night. Couldn't find clean underwear. Saw a cute redhead on the bus and decided to watch where she got off. Nothing ever came of it and rules were lifted after a few months at my request.
Sounds like a pretty chill, reasonable dude. I wouldn't mind them being my supervisor, although I would definitely recommend you check into that guy who was looking where the redhead got off, cause that sounds semi to most definitely kinda sorta stalker-ish.
How do you subtly duck with people? When my dad was a mechanic, people would come in and describe a noise their car is making. It's kind of going screech. My dad would close his eyes and make them repeat the noise over and over while listening intently, saying, "Keep it up. I think I almost got it." Until they're basically out of breath from all this weird-sounding gibberish coming out of their mouths. Imagine other professions trying to do this. My God, what's wrong with the engine? We have to get this plane off the ground. Well, it kind of... Yeah, spit it out. Well, it kind of sort of goes like... I don't know what's going on. Sir, listen. Yeah? You're an idiot. I used to have CCTV monitors in my office at a pretty large store, so I would call different departments and hang up right before they picked up the phone and call them back as soon as they turned around. After a few tries, they would stand and wait for the phone to ring again, but I'd wait until the exact second they turned around. Nobody ever found out who it was. Easily the best entertainment ever. When someone sneezes, I tell them to shut up, and they almost always reply, "Thank you," because they are so used to other people saying, "Bless you." Hi, narrator here. I know it's so short, but it's just the idea. This is so funny. Just, shut up. Thank you. Or I wonder what if it got even like more aggressive, just like, achoo! Shut up! Thank you. I work in pathology, and I spend most of my day dictating into a microphone. I keep myself entertained by messing with the ladies in transcription in a myriad of ways. One thing I like to do is pick a random word and slightly mispronounce it all day just to mess with their heads. One time, we received a tube of chapstick, a small tube of toothpaste, and a bottle of skin lotion that the ER had taken out of someone's backside, not sure if they were a little freaky or just mentally ill. After I dictated that case and described the items, I went to the gift shop and bought the same items and then left them on their desk with a note that said, "No need for these to go to waste." They were confused but had used the hand lotion. By the time they listened to the dictation, I could hear them shout from down the hall. Also, since I recite a lot of case numbers, anytime a number happens to have 666 in it, I will immediately say, "Mark of the Beast!" and use my phone to play an evil laugh and sounds from hell. On Halloween, I taught myself how to say a couple of sentences backward and then recorded it and played it backwards into the microphone. That one freaked them out a bit. If there is ever a really good joke on Reddit jokes, I will end my dictation for the day by telling the joke to them. I also like to do prank calls. I'm the peanut butter jelly guy. When I'm on a waiting list at a restaurant, I always put the name down as Parpar. About half the people kind of hesitate or look at you weird. Play it straight and just spell it out if that happens. When you're called over the loudspeaker, it sounds like they're stuttering, Parpar, party of four? You can also do weird funny names that are just barely believable. Yes, people, obviously not every restaurant says party. Use another name for those. As far as the loudspeaker goes, I mainly use this at a very busy breakfast joint on the weekends. They have outdoor waiting and therefore announce names. It will work for any type of calling out names. I have a pretty good memory when it comes to stories that my friends have told me, so I like to retell their own story to them a year or two later, now starring myself, and see how long it takes for them to catch on. They start off with a look of, oh man, I could tell some of the story as soon as he ends this. Then it turns into a look of, wait, that's my freaking story! A buddy of mine will randomly wish me happy birthday on Facebook when it's not my birthday. So then a bunch of other people wish me a happy birthday and I have to explain it's not my birthday. This ducker does it every year. A couple of weeks ago, he posted on my wall, "Congratulations, man! I knew you'd land that opportunity! So proud of you!" That, followed by a couple dozen people asking me what had I accomplished. I had someone whose birthday was a day before mine. At 11:45 p.m., as we ate dinner, I pointed out it was his birthday, and without question, the staff did the song, dance, and clap. At 12:01 a.m., he then told them it was my birthday. The server demanded ID. Then I got a very, very unenergetic song, dance, and clap. I swear, even the cake looked slump. Best proof I ever had that servers hate that crap. Make up a hobby or skill for your friend. Over a period of weeks or months, nonchalantly describe your friend's aptitude at this skill to your common friends or colleagues. If you pick something general enough, your friend will encounter lots of questions and it might snowball. Examples: Dan is a very good artist. He painted this for me. Show them a picture of some art someone else painted. Did you hear Dan won an award for his artistic skills? Dan is actually a really good singer. He sung in that state championships last summer. Did you know Margaret fixes washes? Bonus points if you pick someone you only vaguely know. Then you can deny starting the rumor and blame someone that knows him even better. In public places like malls or grocery stores, I nonchalantly thank random people. I say, "Hey, I saw what you did back there. And I just want to say thanks. That was great." Most people don't appreciate little things like that anymore, but I do. Then walk away. Bonus points if you pat them on the back. I knew a friend that did this once because he lost a bet and went, "I just want to thank you," and awkwardly handed him $5 and walked away. Use a fake name when ordering food for delivery. Use a different name each time, but always use the same number. After a while of doing this, they get a huge list of names after putting your phone number in whatever system they use. Pay cash each time. You can hear them hesitate for a moment as they try to figure out why there are so many names with different last names as well. Usually they'll ask if you're the person that's the most recent on their list. Always say no and give them a brand new name. I also like to use names that sound weird in a fake kind of way but aren't super obvious. Chester Elegante, as an example. At the Varsity Chicken Wings joint nearby Syracuse U, would enter name as Icarus for the announcement, "Icarus, your wings are ready." I used to work in a call center a few years ago. We had to take customers' details and I'd always repeat back to them to make sure they were correct. While doing this though, I'd duck with them by saying things like, "Oh, is that K for knife? P for pterodactyl? Yeah?" Good old silent letters. Get them heavily involved in a good conversation while standing, and just hand them something. Don't look at it. Keep the conversation going, keep eye contact, and hand them anything, from a tennis ball to a rock you just picked up. Almost every time, they'll grab it without thinking. Works even better if talking and walking. See how much stuff they can hold. Keep looking at a spot a few feet behind them with a worried expression. Look back at them and smile again. Look 3 feet behind them this time. Look a little more scared. Repeat and escalate until they get really uncomfortable and look behind them. It works even though they know you're messing with them. There was one guy in the music department who would always leave his phone on whatever desk he was working at. Every single time I'd walk by, I'd pick it up and move it slightly, no more than 6 inches away, and keep walking. I never took it. I never moved it far. I did this several times a day for several months. Then I stopped. I walked by and instinctively he went to put it back and missed. The look of shock on his face made my life. A family opened this small local theater, and we went a couple of times during October and watched Annabelle and Nightmare on Elm Street. After everyone got deep into the movie, the staff would sneak up behind us, dressed in black, and duck with us pretty hard. Their kid crawled as fast as he could down the row seats and rubbed up against our legs. That was the best one. It was freaky, but hella fun. I don't know, man. I think that would be kind of crazy to send your kids into the dark theater to mess with people as they're watching a scary movie. What if somebody stomped their foot down to the child going, "No, not today, Annabelle! Grr!" No, please. I didn't mean to. That's a lawsuit waiting to happen. Why would you do this? No! Stop! I had a roommate in college that rarely went out to drink, but when he did, he got completely trashed and usually ends up having no recollection what had happened. So whenever we would be drinking together, I take a handful of leaves from outside and hide them in his room in places like under his laundry pile, under his bathroom sink, in his jacket pocket, toaster, in the closet, etc. He still thinks he has a leaf hoarding habit whenever he goes out to drink with us. Wait, you had a toaster in your closet? I saw this on another thread. Can't remember the name of the hilarious person who wrote this, but start out with a subtle lisp when talking to someone you usually see on your own and when others aren't likely to be around when you speak to them. Over the coming weeks, make the lisp more prominent until you can barely be understood by that person. When it has become so bad that they cannot at all understand you, just drop it. Start talking normally again. The guy who's been trying to figure out what you're saying will be so confused. If he asked about it completely, deny it. Act baffled each time he brings it up. Bonus points if he starts asking other people. For example, Steve and Jerry, starting with Steve.
Hey, Jerry, you know the guy from accounting?
Yeah, dude, what about him?
You've heard his lisp, right? He's not got one anymore.
Jerry gives a weird look.
Dude, he's never had a lisp. I don't know what you're talking about.
Steve will be completely mind-ducked. You could also apply this to having a weird accent that suddenly drops. Not a real accent, just a really weird, unrecognizable accent that nobody can figure out. I really love bananas. I take a couple with me every day to work for mid-morning snacks. I decided to make it a habit of taking a break every time I was eating one to stroll over to a coworker's desk, chat with her while eating, and throw the peel into her garbage bin before walking back to my desk. She would deal with the smell for the rest of the day. It took a week before I got a, "If you throw that in there, I'm gonna end you." I mean, dude, I don't know. I might feel the same. I have a very sensitive nose, and if you're coming over and just dumping your crap into my garbage can that I have to work next to for the whole day and be like, "No, that is not a funny prank. That is a disaster. Please don't do this. Please, just no." If you're in a group of people, all of you line up along both sides of an exit. When someone walks out, everyone start clapping and cheering for the person. Some friends and I did this on the subway metro in Singapore while waiting for a train. Some of the reactions are priceless. My one friend and I refer to every animal as kitty, or some variation of it, i.e. wolves are howling moon kitties, meerkats are stand-up kitties, and obviously ferrets are snake kitties. We often ducked with people, like one time when I insisted that this girl's gross dog was a slobber kitty. She was super proud of having this purebred dog, so she was getting quite flustered over the whole thing and practically yelling the breed of her dog at me. The first friend I mentioned walks in after not having heard this argument, and the girl says to him, "You can tell what breed my dog is, right?" And he replies, "Slobber kitty," without missing a beat. She got so mad. Definitely a subtle one, but I like it. I work in a restaurant. As a servant to the public, it's easy to get down on your job. Subtle things really help make you feel less like a backside-kissing peasant. Almost every time I run a tray of food, I make eye contact with the nearest table that's waiting on food and give them a look and smile as if I'm coming right for them to deliver their meal. Then I pass right by them and take it to the actual table. I love when people interrupt their conversation with, "Hey, here's our food," only to be left disappointed. A little sociopathic, considering most of these people didn't do anything to me, but it's just a nice way to feel in control at a job where you are so often walked on. "It was you! You did this to me! Oh, come on! I've definitely had this happen to me somewhere before. No! Now I know your tricks! Now I know. I'm gonna watch you and bring hey, you get back here! Ah!" I looked after my buddy's house when he was on vacation. I took every photo out of its frame, scanned it, photoshopped me in somewhere, printed them, replaced in frames. Months after he got back, he called me saying his brain was telling him something was wrong, but he rarely looked at the photos anymore, so it didn't click until his sister was over and saw the altered photos. One of my best friends is generally quite impatient, and for the last 8 years, I've been purposefully waiting for the last ring whenever he phones me to answer because I know he hates it. The best part, though, is I periodically tell him every so often that I'm doing something that he hates to duck with him, but I'm not telling him what it is, which drives him nuts as he can't figure it out and often insists I'm lying. I do a bunch of things to mess with him, but this is my fave as it's the longest running, lowest effort, mildest inconvenience that gets maximum annoyance. When we're closing down my store, there's a small vestibule at the back door where we have to stand still for about 20 seconds so that we can arm the motion alarm before leaving. As a rule, no one can be in the store alone, and so some employee always has to be with me for this process. I fart every single time. If they move, then the alarm won't set and we have to stand there even longer. In high school, I would sit in the back with my buddies, and whenever we had a substitute, I would sit completely still with my mouth gaping open until drool started pouring out slowly and dripping all over my notebooks. Sub would have zero idea why someone with such a seemingly debilitating mental handicap was in a regular class. Of course, they were far too uncomfortable to say anything that might suggest something was wrong with me. On the side note, I never did the deed in high school. I was once inspired by a post here on Reddit where someone replaced one of their family portraits with a picture of Vladimir Putin. One day when our parents were at work, my brother and I did the same thing by changing out a picture of ourselves with one of Putin bottle feeding a baby goat. We thought it was inconspicuous enough to go unnoticed for a little while, but we both gave it less than a day before our parents would notice. 6 months later, I'm in the middle of my college semester and I get 2 texts. One from my brother saying, "They found Putin," and the other from my dad saying, "You clever plastard." I used to manage a fleet of company cars. One of my friends who worked with me had a car for my fleet. He doesn't know I had spare keys for all of them. The parking lot is not large. You can fit about 50 cars in it. They're all company cars, and there's no reserved parking. So, being the friendly jerk I am, shortly after he arrived at work, I would go out for my smoke break and move his car over 1 or 2 spots. Sometimes I would even reverse the car back into the same spot, if he went in front first. I shuffled his car around the parking lot every 3rd day for about 4 months straight, but never too far from his initial spot.
One day after work, we were at the pub getting a pint. He says to me, "Man, I'm so tired when I get to work. Sometimes I can't even remember where I parked my car." It's been almost 2 years to this day. I still move his car, but I've reduced the frequency to about once a week. He still doesn't know. In my apartment building, there is an unprotected Xfinity Wi-Fi. I have my own Wi-Fi, so I never connect to that one, but for some strange reason, one day, my phone connected to it on its own. So not knowing it did that, I started watching YouTube on my phone and accidentally hit the Chromecast button at the top of the screen. And when I pressed it, it gave me 2 different smart TVs to cast to. I had a huge evil grin on my face. So first, I immediately searched a Rickrolled video and casted it to one of the TVs. I thought this was hilarious, but I wanted to be more clever. I started playing all sorts of different videos. Girl ripping out her hair with a drill while eating corn, 2 frap videos, South Park videos, 4 words, all uppercase. Halfway through the last video, the connection ends. I guess they finally figured out how to turn it off. So the next day, I came home from work and checked my mail, and next to all the mailboxes was a very angry letter to the whole building. Really me. Can't remember it word for word, but it said something like, "Whoever the rumpole is putting videos on our TV, please stop! We have young kids, and now they are repeating the inappropriate language that was in those videos." I immediately bust out laughing in the middle of the hallway, and believe me, I will be doing it again. I had a coworker once who was a real jerk. I started making fun of bald customers, to their face, in a friendly manner. It was a cigar store. Making light is mandatory, on a frequent enough basis when he was around to make him think I really got grossed out by bald people. I don't, and I think I'm probably going bald. It was all part of my long con. After I got him thinking about baldness on a regular basis, I brought in my shills. I talked to customers I was friends with. Under my instruction, they'd always stare at his hair when they saw him or ask, "Did you get a haircut or something?" Every time they'd talk to him. We went to the same barber. Neighborhood dude. Cut his first cigar. So I talked to the barber into asking him, "So, you want me to do anything about, like the thin parts?" After 6 months of this, he was constantly checking his hair in the mirrors, the glass around the shop, asking all the darn time if I thought he was balding. It was hands down the most sociopathic and impressive thing I have ever done in petty revenge. It was like a total of 9 months of work, involved half my customers and eventually the owner of the store. He had the thickest hair I've ever seen. People complimented him on it. But that jerk farted in my face one time while I was eating quiche, and you don't duck with a man's quiche. Wow. So this man literally went Liam Neeson on this. Like this guy just like walking around and just being dumb, be like, "Ah!" And he just looks up, his quiche ruined. "Darn you. I will remember this day. Revenge is best served cold, just like my quiche, which is now cold and smelly."
What film made you say, "Holy crap, there's still 50 minutes left"? The Sound of Music. They get married and I said, "That was a nice ending," and my wife says, "The Nazis haven't even arrived." Some people don't realize that The Sound of Music actually had an intermission, and they only watched half of the movie. I literally had no idea there was a second VHS tape until this Reddit thread. Maybe we bought it used because I only remember seeing the first half. The Sound of Music had Nazis? I must have only seen the first half as well. Pearl Harbor. There's a climactic attack on Pearl Harbor. It's explosive and tragic, some people getting hurt or worse. And then the movie slows down and keeps going for another hour. Ugh. Pearl Harbor is a 2-hour movie squeezed into 3 hours. Roger Ebert. The Batman. I know people love it, but I found the movie extremely boring and almost fell asleep. The car chase scene was basically him getting stuck in traffic. I've seen more exciting things happen on a Texas highway. If you just watch the trailers, you've basically seen the best parts of the movie. Save yourself the 3 hours. I should also point out, because it might not seem this way, but I love Batman, so this movie was a big letdown for me. I actually enjoyed the Batman up until the scene where he choked down that bomb and walked away with absolutely no injuries, not even the slightest burn on his face. After seeing that, I looked at the remaining time on the movie and noticed there was still almost 2 hours left. You know, that opinion isn't as controversial as the OP might make it seem. I think after Nolan did the realistic Batman in the Dark Knight trilogy, we didn't need to see that again. For me, it's Titanic. Back in the 90s where VHSs were still a thing, Titanic the movie was split between 2 VHS tapes. The first being all about the onboarding and the love story, while the second finally had the iceberg hit and sinking after spending all of what felt like another hour on the love story. I would always doze off before the second VHS tape got entered. My family eventually stopped playing part 1 and we would just go straight to part 2 whenever we decided to watch Titanic again. I will admit that I, then a 13-year-old boy, cried seeing Titanic in the theater. But it was because I drank a Mountain Dew too quickly and didn't want to miss the drawing scene, better than I could have hoped for. And the sinking by getting up to go use the restroom. I was the closest I've ever been to bursting my bladder. Full Metal Jacket, in an excellent way. When I was a kid, my family used to watch this on Laserdisc. I think it's the only movie we had that not only had to flip the disc, but that there was a second disc. I'm pretty sure with the multiple intermissions, this is why my family considers it a Christmas movie. Although my dad claims it's because they sing Happy Birthday to Jesus. Full Metal Jacket, the family Christmas movie that everyone loves. Daft Punk's Electroma. Good freaking God. It was a solid hour of robots walking through the desert. I love Daft Punk, but that film was excruciating even by French film standards. Which is so weird because Interstellar 5555 is totally a masterpiece. As someone who has casually listened to Daft Punk over the years, I had no idea that they had films for their music. I guess that's something I have to look into. Transformers Age of Extinction. That movie was so awful, I never even finished it. Spoiler, Galvatron runs away like a punk and Lockdown gets split in two by Optimus' thick metal rod. Then Optimus flies into space and says he's gonna destroy his creator. My husband won free tickets to that movie. We went to the cinema together. I was actually enjoying it. I found the whole thing ridiculous and not believable, but I enjoyed myself. Then there was a long time of explosions and then the movie ended, I thought. I was like, great, 90 minutes is a good length for a movie. And then they went to freaking China and took another hour to end. It was so incredibly boring, which could have all been avoided if they cut it at the 90-minute mark. The extended version of The Lord of the Rings. I didn't realize how much additional footage there was. It's all amazing though. I've run out of food and there's still 20 days of film left. Please send help. This might get me flamed in the comments, but I've never seen Return of the King, and I saw The Two Towers at a midnight screening and really enjoyed it. Black Adam. I know it was only 2 hours, but to me it felt so much longer. My husband and I thought the same thing. I paused it saying, God damn, how much longer do we have? And then we saw it was 2 hours total. Felt like a glitch in the Matrix or something. At one point during Black Adam, I legit thought the movie was over since it had a climax and then there was still like another 30 minutes left. Pirates of the Caribbean: Curse of the Black Pearl. Not in a bad way. I just remember feeling like I was watching the climax and then it just kept going. Would have agreed with the sequels, but I actually thought the first Pirates was a perfect movie. My brother usually quotes Barbossa, Jeffrey Rush, when not wanting to do something. I'm disinclined to acquiesce to your request. It means no. I prefer, the code is more like what you call guidelines than actual rules. The Pirates of the Caribbean series are some of my absolute favorite films to watch. They are just straight fun. Gone Girl. In my defense, I know nothing about it and thought it was a rom-com/chick flick. Was going through a toxic divorce at the time and went to see this to take my mind off my troubles. I just sat shell-shocked afterwards. My other movie was World War Z. Near the end, there was this tense scene where he has to walk past one teeth-gnawing zombie. I let out an involuntary and inappropriate laugh at how much it resembled my ex in zombie makeup. It was meant to be a tense scene. Also, when the scientist got scared and ran and tripped down the ramp and shot himself, I was the lone person in the theater who laughed at the sheer absurdity of it. I was on my third date and my GF broke it off because she thought I was a manic. Dude, you're not alone. When he runs back to the ramp and slips and falls and accidentally shoots himself in the face, and Brad Pitt's face had just so much disappointment on it, after they spent like a good 15 minutes building the scientist up as the last hope of humanity, It was hilarious. I've never seen World War Z, but I love a good bad movie. I might have to check this one out. Artificial Intelligence. Man, that movie dragged. And then it finally had the bittersweet ending and I was like, yeah, not my thing, but I can totally see why people like it. And then it went on. That movie was the prime example of the adage that part of knowing how to paint a great masterpiece is knowing when to stop painting. Well, geez, Stanley Kubrick died before filming it. How much harder did you want him to stop? Okay, I'm not gonna lie, that joke made my jaw drop. Hateful Eight. The movie is one long conversation, but in a good way. I love that film. My uncle was in hospice having palliative care with his own room a few years ago. I asked him what his favorite films are, and I downloaded them and put them on a drive. I know what types of films he likes. He was in his 90s and loved westerns and was fine with violence in movies. So I added Hateful Eight. On the night before he died, he told the nurse that he was fine and he was going to bed to watch the rest of this really long film I had given him, which he said was great. The next morning, he got up happy, sat in his chair, and died. Okay, I wasn't expecting a movie scene to come out of this comment section, but as for the long conversation comment, isn't that all Tarantino films? Wonder Woman 1984. Can't believe I'm not seeing this mentioned already. I remember checking how long was left and saying, Jesus Christ, for real? When there was nearly an hour to go. We really enjoyed the first one, so we had a big family movie night, not something we do often, and dragged everyone in to watch the sequel. It was really disappointing. Every film ever since the internet destroyed my attention span. Honestly, one of the best parts of going to a theater is the fact that the social code of the setting forces you to disconnect. It's too easy to check your phone and get distracted by life when you're watching a movie at home. Hell, I've made it through stinkers in a theater I definitely wouldn't have if I was watching them on Netflix or Hulu. I'm looking at you, Jurassic World Dominion. Everything Everywhere All at Once. Once it hit the second half, I had no idea where it was going or how it was going to resolve in a satisfying way. But it did, and is now one of my favorite movies ever. I still want to watch that movie. It looks pretty awesome. Spicy videos after those first 2 minutes. Black Panther Wakanda Forever. It's just a lot of filler. At least the title of the film is honest. The brand new Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, in a good way. Rented the movie and was blown away early on, and seeing more time had me excited to see it through. Really glad to see DreamWorks doing well, and I recommend for others to watch it. This movie has to be one of the most go-watch word-of-mouth movies in such a long time. I constantly hear people mentioning this movie, and I thought it was gonna be something that people would pass over. Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. When bats and soups are done fighting, and you know the fight with Doomsday was still going to happen, the name of the movie was the first clue that it was going to be an overly long slog. They could have made the whole Doomsday topic into a separate movie, but nope, gotta combine it with the literal god going against a guy wearing a Coke can. I don't care what anyone says about BVS, it gave me the best Batman fight scene of all time, so I will always stand up for that movie. That Batman was so much more entertaining than realistic Batman. The new Elvis biopic. I wasn't a fan overall, but holy hell, they could have cut 30 to 40 minutes and ended up with the same film. The film had too much dialogue as well, needed a little less conversation and a little bit more action. The only scene I've seen from that film is the "he's white" scene, and it's only because it became a meme on Twitter. Star Trek: The Slow Motion Picture. The Matrix 4, didn't finish it because it was too boring. I had to watch some parts of it again because I literally slept halfway through it, and I'm a Matrix fan. I'll be honest, that movie tried to be so meta it felt like it was a parody. A History of Violence, in a good way. What seems like an ending to a typical good movie happens about halfway through the runtime. I was really stunned and excited to see where it went next. Twilight, the tree scene almost made me chuck my laptop across the room. They are so terrible that they loop back around to being fun. If you have a group of friends who were really into Twilight in middle school or high school, it forces you to relive your younger cringe self. I thought it couldn't be that bad. Surely my early 20s self wasn't that bad. Oh god, the cringe was next level. My friend and I had a great time though, binging the films over a weekend and drinking. I remember that one close family friend that took me to see it in theaters. I think I was 13. Anyways, I remember her sitting there and laughing at how horrible it was, and the teenage me was so offended. I still haven't seen those films, and I'm not sure if I ever will. I do love the lore of these movies inspiring the writer of 50 Shades of Grey though. That Zack Snyder Justice League movie. Was all excited to see it, and then about 2 hours in, I was checking how long I had left. It was about an hour. I never finished it. I think he made a good choice to have it broken into parts that had their own little title screens. It's like going to a theater and having an intermission. Shame it felt like, I might as well get through this, rather than, oh boy, can't wait to find out what happens next. But I'm glad Snyder took out the part where the Flash accidentally motorboats Wonder Woman. You know, the classic scenario that seems to pop up in Whedon movies, or at least in superhero movies. I remember it happening between Bruce Banner and Black Widow in Age of Ultron as well. I will never watch that movie again. After the 2-hour mark, I couldn't believe that there was still 2 hours left. Also, every time Wonder Woman showed up, she went into slow-mo and they played her music. It got so freaking annoying. Thor, Love and Thunder. When we saw how much time was left, we just shut it off. Fun fact, I think Thor Ragnarok is the worst MCU film. I know people won't agree, but when Bruce Banner says he's going to show who he is and then jumps off the plane to bounce off the bridge, I wanted to break my TV. Every character morphed into a child in that film. Gangs of New York. Don't get me wrong, it was a great flick, but holy crap, it dragged on. The Return of the King. It had a lot of endings for all the things it had to wrap up, and I mistakenly bought the extra large Pepsi. I also have to say Lord of the Rings Return of the King. Throw the bloody ring in, Frodo, for God's sake. The whole cinema clapped when he finally did it. When I saw it in theaters, I started gathering up my stuff 4 separate times thinking we were at the end. When it did actually finally end, I just sat there, thinking it must be a trick and I will not be fooled into putting one arm into my coat sleeve again. The Last Jedi. I was ready to leave after the space battle and thought the ships were going down to the Red Sand planet and that was going to be the credit roll. The Casino Planet side quest took forever. I'm one of those people that actually like the film only because it didn't feel like a repeat of other Star Wars films. In a good way, Saving Private Ryan. The Normandy sequence is like 30 minutes and then the rest of the movie is like 50 minutes. Gladiator had me saying, holy crap, there is only 50 minutes left? He enters the Coliseum in the second half of the movie. I felt like it had just started. I haven't watched the theatrical cut in over a decade now. The extended gives it room to breathe, better justifies the subplots with Lucia and with Maximus's old servant, and doesn't drag because the film already had me wanting more. It also gives context to the "are you not entertained" line when the slave owner says to him, "you're an entertainer" before the fight. Rewatching it for the first time in a long time recently, I found it baffling that they would cut that line when it only adds about a minute to the runtime. "Are you not entertained" is one of the most iconic lines ever. Me and my friends always throw that out when we have an epic moment in any video game we play. For me, it has to be The Omen from 2006. Not because the movie was bad or terrible, I mean honestly I don't remember it being great either, but what happened before I even entered the theater had more entertaining twists than that whole movie. At the time, I wasn't able to legally get into an R-rated movie alone, and I was supposed to watch this movie with a bunch of friends. Well, all of my friends managed to get into the theater and I was still stuck outside. So I asked a random couple if they would be willing to pretend to be my parents. The woman, who was pretty attractive, put her arm around me and helped me get in. Once I was in, I told them thank you, but before I could leave, the guy stopped me and said, "No problem, but I don't want to see you causing any trouble during the movie." And then he flashes his police badge at me. I was just so stunned that a cop just helped me get into an R-rated movie. It was a pretty cool moment and something I definitely remember more than anything in that movie. The Girlfriend Experience. People might not know this film, but it stars this actress named Sasha Grey. People of culture might know who she is. But I went to go see this film at a small art house theater and I was just waiting for the movie to be over because I thought it was so bad. There were moments in this movie where some scenes were completely overexposed and you could barely see the actors. If I'm being honest, I would have had more fun just watching some of Sasha Grey's home movies instead. I didn't know The Girlfriend Experience was a movie. I always thought it was a TV series. The more you know. Sasha Grey might not have made it as an actress, but she's doing pretty well as a Twitch streamer. Any MCU movie after Guardians of the Galaxy Part 1. I'm not sure what happened, but Disney saw the success of that movie and thought, everyone loves it because it's funny. Why not make all our characters funny? And since then, every main character seems like they need to be a comedian, and the term comic relief character has been thrown out the window into a garbage truck, taken to the dump, and had a nuclear bomb dropped on it. I honestly stopped watching the MCU after Endgame because I felt like they were leaning into the comedy over great storytelling. Plus, Endgame just felt like the perfect jumping off point with everything that happened in the movie. 2001 A Space Odyssey. Look, I respect Stanley Kubrick, and this movie was absolutely gorgeous and had a lot of shots that looked perfect, but what even was this movie? I was just so bored the whole time while I was looking at these perfectly shot scenes. The Dark Knight in the best ways. Yup, this is the one. After he finally catches the Joker, it feels like the end, but the film still has ways to go. I remember thinking, wait, it's not done yet? When I first watched it. Yeah, and the scene leading up to the catch is so dramatic and high production, it totally could have passed for a good finale. Pretty much any big superhero movie. They all have this big battle sequence about an hour and a half in, and you go, wow, okay, movie done. And then they have to build up to another, more final battle. I really liked Venom 2 for that reason. 90 minutes, I got in, they did their stuff, and I left. Top Gun Maverick. After seeing them do the real mission and Mav gets shot down, I really thought they were just going to end it there and finish it in a sequel. But then it just kept going and it was so good. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. The entire movie is amazing, but damn does it take a while. I just felt like that whole movie was stuff almost happening with no payoff until the end. Cruella. Not 50 minutes, but I thought the movie was over when she visited the fountain and delivered the monologue to her mother. Then it still got better. Django Unchained. I really enjoyed the movie, but dear lord it could have ended like 3 times. This was Tarantino's first movie after the death of his longtime editor. In my honest opinion, his work has taken a notable downturn as a result. I'm down with Django, but Hateful Eight and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood were way too long. Avatar 2. I just wanted to piss, but the movie just dragged on too long. But with that said, the second half was really entertaining, to be fair. Yeah, I was like, dude, Jim, we're all seeing this movie in the theaters with good recliners and fancy drinks. The human bladder is not meant to absorb a pint of IPA and then watch this much water splashing around. I saw this with a friend and my summary of it was this. I felt like I had just watched 2 years of a badly edited TV series in one sitting. I still haven't seen Avatar 2, really don't have any interest. I mean, the first one was basically just Pocahontas and Ferngully mixed together. David Cronenberg's Crash. Play started out packed, then I realized after 30 minutes I was one of a handful of people left watching this messed up movie. When it finished, I was the only one of 3 left in the theater. Wow, that's all I can say. When I first read this, I thought they were talking about the movie Crash that beat out Brokeback Mountain at the Oscars for Best Picture. The Revenant. Gah, I saw that movie in theaters and it was so packed so I had to sit way too close to the screen. And it gave me such a horrible migraine. So I'm sitting there in this movie that won't end and my head is killing me. If I had been there with my husband, I would have just asked to leave, but we had gone with friends. And we hadn't driven ourselves, so I didn't feel like I could. I was so miserable. Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. Right after the Phantom destroys New York and Alec Baldwin's friends all die, I thought, okay, we should be wrapping this up in the next 10 minutes. Nope! It was another 30 minutes of slogging through an already boring and lazy story. I had to watch Stanley Kubrick's Spartacus for a college class about 3 years ago, and it was awful. From the sound to the pacing and the 5-minute breaks that were just music and a blank screen, it was just overall a horrible experience. Eyes Wide Shut. Most boring film I've ever seen in my life, and I had to go watch it for a class so I couldn't just stop watching it. I hate that movie. And the jerk who plays only one note on the piano for 20 minutes of this horrible movie.
Cops of Reddit. What's the stupidest thing or crime someone did right in front of you? I worked as a small town sheriff's deputy in a rural country. One night, I was running code to a domestic disturbance at a home a couple miles away. I was cresting a hill and noticed a pair of headlights in my lane of travel on a 2-lane road. I pulled up and noticed a beat-up old yellow pickup truck with the driver's side door open facing me and blocking the road. I then noticed a disheveled-looking man standing in the ditch, sheepishly holding an obviously upset raccoon by the tail. I stepped out of the car and yelled to the man politely, inquiring as to what was happening. He shrugged his shoulders and yelled, "Sorry, forensic Sasquatch," before pitching the raccoon into the bushes. I didn't have time to ask questions, but told him to move the car out of the way so I could get to my domestic. Months later, I ran into the gentleman in town, and he introduced himself as the raccoon guy. I asked him what had happened, and he told me.
I was driving along and saw two raccoons trying to get into the same culvert and they got stuck. I told myself, I'll bet I could grab one of them if I tried, and went and grabbed him by the tail. Ooh, boy, was he sure mad.
I asked him what he was planning to do with the raccoon, and he just shrugged and gave me a quizzical look. My roommate was a cop. We were walking home after work. I passed right by the station on my way home, and she'd usually join me. She was still in uniform, badge and all. We passed by a liquor store, and a group of kids surrounded us and asked us to buy them liquor. She said, "How old are you?" They said,
16. That's why we can't buy it ourselves.
She asked them after she arrested them why they'd approach a uniformed police officer of all people. Their answer,
We didn't think you were a real cop because you're a woman.
"Wow! So these children must be very educated. Someone please cue the Curb Your Enthusiasm theme song as they're all just being arrested and handcuffed behind them. Bum, bum, bum. You kids are dumb and you're going to jail. You're going to be in juvie with the record." Oh, geez. So many. Probably the guy who asked me how much illegal substances I wanted to buy. I was in full uniform, but he was looking down, counting the rocks in his palm at night. I laughed and said, "I'll take all of it." He said, "That's going to be like $50 then." As he looked up at me, realizing the error in his ways upon seeing me, he ate them all. He got out of going to jail right then, but got a warrant for destroying evidence and a ride to the hospital to have his stomach pumped. So, kind of worth it for him, I guess. We just went through this literally last time. Bum, bum, bum. You're not going to jail, but you're going to go in the hospital having your stomach pumped because you are stupid. Pardon my Joker laugh there. Driving down a two-way road, one lane each way, car up ahead of me on my lane makes a U-turn from the curb. He was parked. Then proceeds to swerve towards my lane, driving on the wrong side of the road. I slow down. He honks at me as if I'm in his way. He swerves back to his lane and keeps driving. I stop him ultimately after he hit the curb trying to pull over. Yup, guess who got a DUI? Not a cop, but I was behind the Dumbo who did it in front of the cop. Near my mom's house is a bunch of horse property, so it's normal to see guys go by on their horses. I was behind a black SUV and see a police car parked facing the street. The Dumbo in the SUV slowed down just to veer closer and rev his engine at the horses. One was calm, but the other was freaking out. The cop's sirens came on so fast, it surprised me. Guy got his horse under control, and the Dumbo in the SUV got pulled over. I deal with stupid every day at work, but here's one that I always like to tell. Back when I was working gang units, we were in a residential neighborhood in East LA at night. We hear a car do a huge, long burnout. It sounded really close. We turn off our lights and wait for some weapon fire, but never heard any. Just then, a car goes flying by us. We turn on the lights and go after him. He pulls over right away and starts apologizing to us, saying that his foot slipped off the clutch. Yeah, right. A burnout that long and your foot slipped? Turns out, he just broken up with his girlfriend and he went to her house to do the burnout in front of it. Now, the interesting thing about working gangs is we don't do traffic or answer calls unless it is gang-related. We muck with gang members. But we had to stop because of what he did in the neighborhood we were in. Since this guy wasn't a gang member, we were just going to let him go. We hadn't even run his license or even asked for it yet. Now here is where it gets stupid. He looks at us and says, "Can I ask you something before you take me to jail?" My partner and I look at each other, ask him for his ID, and run it. Turns out, he had a $15,000 warrant for his arrest. He was seconds away from going home and ended up in jail that night. Funny thing is, I don't think he ever asked the question. I was military police, and this happened back in 2012. I was doing a routine building check on one of the schools on base. Due to our security posture that day, I was in full battle rattle and had my piece with me at 6'2" and 220 pounds. I am an enormous person with all that body armor and such on. I turn the corner to check the backside of the school and see two teenagers sitting on a picnic table outside one of the doors. Mind you, this is a Saturday, so there's nobody in the building. The kid sees me, a giant wall of weaponry, and immediately throws something under the little PE shed. My first thought was the leaf. We're on a military base, you can't have that crap. So I asked the kid what he just threw, and he immediately starts crying. The girl he was with had such a bewildered look in her face at the sight of him breaking down like that. Admittedly, I was also a bit surprised. The girl was 16 and the guy was 15. She told me that it was just a cigarette, so I made the boy fish it out from under the shed. Sure enough, it was just a Camel Crush cig. Not even broken yet. "Are your parents home?" I asked the boy. He shook his head. You live on base, right? Go smoke these in your dad's garage. It's Saturday anyway. Why are you here in school property? I'm not going to arrest you." Suddenly he stopped crying and started praising me for being the coolest cop ever and thanking me for not bringing him in. As if smoking a cig was a huge deal on a military base full of nuclear weapons. Later that day, coincidentally, also on school building check, I found two 14-year-old boys sitting against the wall eating honeysuckle flower petals. So, that was weird. I was out at a client's site to burn some camera footage for the police, and due to the slow DVD burner, I found myself outside having a smoke break with the detective that came to collect it. We were shooting the crap back and forth about the weather when a homeless guy walked up and asked for a light. Duct tape jacket and shoes? Check. Overpowering smell of mold, waste, and burning tires? Check. While I was doing the mental math of, is this guy likely to try a runner with my Zippo in front of a cop? The detective produced a book of matches and told him to keep them. The homeless guy walked 10 feet away to an illegally parked Crown Vic belonging to the cop, sat on the hood, and started emptying his pockets. An illegal substance pipe, 2 Bic lighters, 1 crushed pack of illegal substances, and a handful of plastic baggies. Detective elbowing me and whispering, "He's lucky I have places to be." Finally, the guy found what he was looking for, a pathetic little pinner of an herbal leaf, wedged in the cigarette pack and lit up using one of the lighters. Detective still whispering, "Bet he doesn't even share." I let out a snort, which the homeless guy apparently didn't appreciate. He looked straight at me, then straight at the cop, and the flash would have lost to this 90-pound white dude in duct tape shoes. He was half a block away and around the corner before his rolled-up leaf stopped rolling around on the sidewalk. I was training a rookie. We were the same unit with the same designator, a radio call sign. I called dispatch my police radio. 240 Alpha is what I said, indicating that we, 240 Alpha, were calling dispatch. My rookie was standing directly next to me, like right beside me. He got on the radio and said, 240 Alpha, go ahead. Thinking the dispatcher was calling him. In short, he answered himself on the radio. The dispatcher was confused. I wonder how long they kept him like that after he said what he said. I just want to know if they were just staring at him the whole while.
"Oh boy, this isn't good. Dispatcher's gone quiet. What do we do, sir?"
I don't know. Why don't you ask him again? And just may I remind you, do you see this piece of paper?
"Yeah?
What does it say right there?
240 Alpha. Yeah, I know."
Uh-huh. And do you see the names beneath that?
"Well, hey, wait a minute. That's my name." "Oh, that's my name."
Yeah, that's your name. My agency is the primary agency responsible for boat patrol in my area. One July weekend, my partner and I are just beginning an afternoon shift on the water when another boater flags us down. We make our way over, expecting them to be having mechanical trouble or something. Nope. 2 guys on board, and the operator tells us he wants us to write him a ticket for his expired registration. Says he was just given a warning last weekend and knew we'd catch him anyway. So, might as well get it over with. Pretty good, right? Not done. Eventually, we put our boat on the lift and get off the water to grab dinner. While eating, we get a call from dispatch that a boater had just called in a complaint about another boat that was operating dangerously and nearly caused an accident. We make our way back there, and sure enough, it's the boat from earlier. Turns out they'd asked us to write them a ticket earlier because they thought that would keep us from stopping them later after they had gotten intoxicated. Didn't want that OWI. And still not done. This time, when we stop them, there is an additional person on board, an intoxicated girl that they allow to operate their boat. We check her ID, says she's 22, but can't get a return on it. It's fake. She's underage, and they knew it. Now she's going to jail for OWI, among other things, and they are getting charged with furnishing alcohol to a minor. Good thing they got that registration ticket out of the way earlier. I am completely unsurprised. Just about every boater at the marina I live near are alcoholics that do stupid crap just like this. My mother does security at an abandoned waterfront hotel, and every single freaking time she has to tell half those boaters, abandoned private property for your own safety, there's no trespassing, even though they've been there 15 times before, just because they were too crap-faced last time to remember. And every time they're like, "What? Really? No way!" Like they can't believe the place is dangerous, even though the place is literally falling in on itself. There was this one guy who would stand on property and talk to her for 5 to 15 minutes, despite being told to leave and getting no reception from her. Then she called 911 after watching him book it from one of the rooms and finding a lab inside. Since she knew him, she was able to point to which boat he lived in, and he was getting arrested. He was like, "But I thought we were cool!" No, not even a little bit. Especially not cover up your illegal substance lab and probably become a felon in the process. Cool. Not a cop, but I saw it happen. I worked at a pretty busy nightclub and I watched a man pick up a woman's purse and walk away with it, out toward the parking lot. I saw him get into the passenger side of a vehicle by himself with the purse. I informed one of the off-duty police officers that we'd hire for security. The officer approached the vehicle and turns his flashlight on to catch the guy in the middle of taking a Snapchat video of himself chugging cheap vodka. Turns out, it was his cousin's purse and he needed the car keys. Stupid thing is it was dollar drink night, so how much was he really even saving? At least he got a good Snapchat out of it. Not a cop, but one day a massive water main burst in town and knocked out a couple streets. They put the cops in the ends to make sure nobody went down them. I was driving on a late afternoon and nobody else was really around, so pretty quiet. A young female cop was standing on the corner when over the road from her, some guy wandering down the street jumps up and starts swinging from the road closure sign and then pulled it down. The look on her face was one of pure, "Are you freaking kidding me right now?" Drove off before anything else happened, but I imagine that went poorly for him. Two of my cousins are in their last year of cop school, so this summer they visited us from the city, and my dad took them fishing at the local lake. Some tourists in an RV were camped illegally. Doesn't bother us locals since it is out of the way, and hadn't had any luck fishing. They saw the catch my dad was carrying and asked if they could buy it. He said he could give it to them for free since we already had dinner. The tourists then gave my dad at least 5 big cartons of cigarettes as payment. And it is almost 100% smuggler goods from the border. My dad turned around and saw my 2 cousins literally sitting on the ground laughing. My partner was writing a ticket while I was documenting the stop via the patrol car's computer. We were on a city street next to a dramatically curved freeway off-ramp. We hear a tremendously loud screeching of brakes and a crashing sound that went on for a few seconds. We turn around and an SUV is on its roof. A tire is rolling across the intersection. We put it out over the air and run over. I looked inside my flashlight and there were multiple bodies all over the SUV. The fire department arrived and cut them out. They were all badly injured and the driver was gone. Drive safe and pay attention, guys. There's a reason my partner was writing a freaking speeding ticket. Not a cop, but was a teenager who did something stupid. My buddy and I were at a stoplight in Princeton, New Jersey, one summer evening, and a town cop pulls up next to us, and for some unknown reason, I turned to my buddy and said, "Hey Dave, put away that illegal substance pipe." Needless to say, we get immediately pulled over and 3 more cops come rolling up. Not hard. We were also 50 yards from the police station. My buddy's car was registered in PA, so it was extra special for the cops. Neither my buddy nor the cops were terribly happy with me that day. After a thorough search of our persons and the car, where nothing illegal was found, the cop turns to me and says,
In the future, you should make sure your hummingbird rump doesn't get in the way of your crocodile mouth.
I still laugh about it to this day. This was sometime around 1992. Opposite side of the story, officer pulled me over for driving through downtown with my brights on at 2 a.m. Intoxicated, I reached out to turn them off. As he told me why he pulled me over, I hit my windshield washers instead and sprayed him. He let me go, but he followed me as I drove around the block to drop off a buddy. Pulled in behind my friend's car so he can go home. He literally falls out of my car, beer in hand, six-pack in the other. Lights come on, and the cop gets out and approaches us. Turns out my buddy was his training officer. Lets us both go with the promise that we aren't going anywhere until we sober up. I walked across the street to a friend's place. Cop leaves. Buddy takes off. Not really a cop, but maybe the cop who handled me will remember this story. Picked up Call of Duty at a GameStop, which was quite a drive away from me, and I wasn't too familiar with the area. The main street had a ton of traffic, so I decided to use side streets without looking at my GPS and ended up driving into what looked like an abandoned factory. Had no clue where I was, but I drove slowly past the open gate, which appeared unattended at the moment, and attempted to make a U-turn back out. Right as I'm about to exit, the cop holds out his hand and yells, "Hey you! What do you think you're doing?" I had no clue where I was, but I knew I mucked up. I rolled down the window and the officer, in a very distinct Australian accent, says, "So, you enjoy running stop signs?" Had no clue there was a stop sign, but I didn't make a complete stop, so I just felt a huge fine coming my way. Told him I had no clue where I was and that I was really sorry. I just wanted to play some video games, man. He goes on to tell me that I was in the DWP, Department of Water and Power, and if I drove any further down, the guards were authorized to shoot me and that I could have been terminated since they were on red alert. After he asks me to pull over and check my license plate, make and model, etc., he tells me that they'll send my info to the FBI and look for any infractions or criminal records. None, by the way, but okay. Told him again I was sorry, and dude just kept saying, "Leave, leave, leave." I feel for the man because I'm sure he might have lost his job, but he let me go with a slap on the wrist and my body intact. Got extremely lucky, and now I always use GPS if I'm not at least 75% familiar with the area. Hope he's doing well, I owe him. But I swear something felt off, but in the heat of the moment I was honestly dumbfounded. He seemed more annoyed of me and couldn't wait for me to leave, but I don't really know what was happening on his end. That quote about getting shot at stuck with me as he explicitly told me I'd be terminated. And I don't usually hear cops talk about the FBI investigating, but this is government property, so, I just rolled with it. Also, that Call of Duty died out in a month. It was World War II. Overall, not a worthwhile game. What? That's what you got out of this whole scenario? You were threatened that you were going to get shot by a very angry Australian man who was dressed as a police officer and talking about the FBI and how you could have lost your life. But the last thing that you threw in there is, well, the worst part is that Call of Duty sucked. What? I would say I'm just glad that you're alive. As a teenager, my friend and I were jaywalking. We got to the center divider when a cop drove by, then made a U-turn, and we stupidly started running and ran up into a parking structure. We were on the roof when 3 cop cars came up, surrounded us with weapons drawn, telling us to put our hands up. They asked why we ran, and we said we didn't know, which we really didn't. We just ran. They searched us, and I had some candy in my pocket, which they asked what I was holding. It was gummy bears. They let us go with a warning. I thought I was pretty stupid. Man, how terrible would it be if the cops were like, "And we're going to take this under suspicious activity. Make sure that these gummies aren't filled with anything illegal." Yeah. All right, be on your way. Guys, look, I just got free candy. Police officers of Reddit, what was your "they could have gotten away with it if they had kept their mouth shut" moment? I had a car pass me once, where a passenger hangs the upper half of his body out of the passenger side window with his middle finger in the air while screaming, "Muck the police!" He had my attention for the seatbelt violation. I got behind the car and ran the registration. Registration is suspended. Registered owner's driver's license is attached to the registration and his license is suspended. Registered owner also has 2 warrants for retail theft. I stopped the car and they both started with the free speech thing and how I can't stop them for giving me the fingers, which is 100% correct. When I pointed out that I can, however, stop them for the passenger not wearing a seatbelt and for the registration violation, suddenly they both got quiet. Driver got arrested for suspended license and his warrants, and the passenger got himself a citation. The driver's vehicle got impounded. Moral of the story? Tell your passengers to shut their mouths. Had that guy not been a moron, his buddy would have been homeward bound. Not a cop, but a public defender had a client who made a long statement that didn't help her case, but the judge was letting her go without setting bail. Before leaving the courtroom, however, I was informed that the police from another precinct were coming to pick her up, and she'd be held until they did. They didn't get her until much later, but I told her to absolutely not say anything to them, to keep her mouth shut. The next day I go to do her arraignment, and I get the notice of any statements, which started with, "My lawyer told me not to say anything, but this is what happened," and admitted to a variety of crimes. It was frustrating to say the least. Not a police officer, but I do know of this house in my local village that was a notorious den of illegal substances. The police came to search that place but couldn't find anything, and as they were leaving, the lovely owner yelled at them that they should have brought the dogs. So yeah, they came back a few days later with the illegal substance sniffing dogs and found huge amounts of that hidden away. Absolute morons. When I was growing up, a cop approached my mom, who's an attorney, at our house. She closed the door behind her, and I watched the interaction inside with my doggo. Now, my mom was always very honest with me about criminal stuff. She probably wanted to scare me out of committing crimes, something that largely worked. She comes back inside a good 30 minutes later and tells me about the stupidest dealers ever. Guy and girlfriend sell mad amount of illegal substances just down the block from my house. They are the big boy distributors of the area. It's a decent-sized city, but on the smaller side, so I don't know how the heck the illegal substance scene works. And the cops have been hoping to bring these guys down. Well, the cops caught a break when they confessed to a dispatcher. Turns out they were robbed by a rival dealer, and their computer was stolen. This is the early 2000s, so desktops were pretty clunky, along with all of their illegal substance. They called 911 and proceeded to tell them all of these details, somehow never realizing their stupidity. The cops swooped in, the station is literally 2 minutes away, and arrested the lot of them, and then told my mom everything. They were in our neighborhood, and my mom knows and is loved by everyone. Moral of the story? When reporting your house is being robbed, maybe leave out the part where all of your illegal substances was stolen. You know, I'm really curious how that conversation actually went down over the phone. 911, what's your emergency?
Oh, thank God. Everything's been robbed. I'm reporting a robbery.
Okay.
My new Dell computer and all my illegal substances are gone.
Oh, please go on.
The white stuff, the powder, the sugar cherries, all the wings. It's the good stuff.
Yep. We'll come pick you up in a couple minutes.
Honey, I did it. I told them everything. Oh God, I told them everything.
I was asked to help keep the peace while 2 probation officers searched a guy's house. In most jurisdictions, you have to submit to a search of your person and your home if you're on probation. During the search, a PO lifted the probationer's mattress and said monotonously, "Wow." The probationer got upset and said, "Yeah, it's freaking snowing my piece. Arrest me. I don't give a freak." Turns out the PO found a huge naughty toy, but after the guy opened his mouth, the PO lifted the mattress more and found a bunch of individually wrapped grams of snow and a weapon. The PO said that seeing the naughty toy was enough for him to ignore the mattress, but because the guy said something, he kept looking. That guy's attitude and his need to open his mouth got him 10 years in prison. Not me, but my boyfriend. Boyfriend's working overnight when a guy comes through town doing 35 miles per hour in a 25-mile area. Boyfriend pulls the guy over and asks for his documentation, license, registration, insurance. Guy flips open his glove box, snatches his documents out, and snaps the glove box closed super fast. Boyfriend laughs and says, "What do you have in there?" Guy gets a little sheepish and says, "You know, registration, insurance, a little bit of leaf." Boyfriend, "What?" Guy coughs and says, "Registration, insurance, and a little bit of leaf." Boyfriend laughs again and says, "Seriously? Can I see?" Guy got a slap on the wrist for being honest and having a very small amount. Currently watching live PD, and the guy told the officer, "I have caffeine pills in my back pocket." Gets them out, puts them on the hood. Everyone's chill. The dude then comes clean and says it's Molly, and the officers look at each other and go, "Do we even have a test kit for that?" Other officer says, "No." Dude's face just shows he should have kept his mouth shut. I saw PD as well, ironically in my hometown, where a woman pulled off the highway unnecessarily with another car that the cop initially intended to pull over. She mentioned to the cop that she wanted to have a few words with the other vehicle because they were being rumpholes and trying to race her. This is why the cop pulled the other car over, because they were speeding. Anyways, officer tells her no and that she needs to leave, and that it would not only be unsafe but also illegal if she got out of her vehicle like that on the side of the highway. She says, "Okay, whatever." Cop proceeds to speak with the other vehicle, and she is still parked there, now yelling out her window at the other vehicle. Both the cop and the people are laughing, and he still does nothing. Cop goes to write the speeding ticket, and this witch gets out of her car and approaches the other vehicle. He finally freaking cuffed her and put her in the squad car, all the while she's complaining that it's completely unfair, was completely dumbfounded. Okay, so we had a DUI accident where a guy kept driving straight into the woods into a tree because his GPS was predicting a future street. He walked back to his hotel room and left his check and papers in the car. So we go to the hotel and go to his room and knock on the door. He did not have to answer, but he did. He was pretty clearly intoxicated. I asked him if he had anything to drink since the accident. He did not have to answer, or he could have told us that he drank after the accident. He said, "No, I haven't had anything to drink since the accident." And where I'm from, you have 24 hours to report a property damage only accident, so it wasn't even a hit and run. So, as I'm locking the guy up, he tells me he's a lawyer. I told him, "I hope you're not a defense attorney." But in his defense, he was intoxicated. I can respect that. A man who follows his GPS, his Siri, all the way to the end. Turn left.
"But Siri, that's just the ocean. Are you sure that's the way to Disney World?"
Yes, turn left. Do it now.
Okay, here we go.
Yes, another one. When I was in high school, I liked to park in parking spots that cars had parked poorly into just as a muck you. One time, I was at a high school football game and a Jeep had parked like crap. He was nearly halfway into the spot next to him and parked at an angle. I was driving a 98 Chevy Silverado at the time, a big old pickup truck, and I had my brother help guide me into the spot so I was perfectly in the lines. That made it so the driver door was completely impossible to get in. I took a picture for the novelty of it and went on my way. When I got back to my car, the Jeep was gone and every panel on the passenger side of my car was keyed. There was an officer nearby, so I told him about it and showed him the picture. He told me there's not a lot they could do because there were no witnesses, but he'd give it a shot. He looked up their license plate, called them, and asked them if they had done it. They confessed and ended up having to pay $1,600 in restitution along with getting a felony. My friend was pulled over for not wearing a seatbelt while he was with a few buddies, gets handed his ticket, and the guy in the back seat says, "Am I going to get a ticket too?" Officer replies, "Well, were you wearing a seatbelt?" No." "All right, can I see your ID?" Not really the brightest fella. I don't know why, but I love how, he was excited by this. "Hey, oh, come on, man, can I have a ticket?" "Yeah, me too. Come on, I want one. Let's all get one." "Oh, shucks. All right, kids, everyone gets a ticket today. Hooray! I pull over this guy for expired tabs, ask for his ID, and he's feeling around for his wallet, can't find it. He says, man, I'm one of you, it's cool. Oh, what department? Oh, actually I'm a security guard, but same thing. I'm polite. So, where's your ID? Oh, it's in the... And he motions to the trunk. It's in the trunk? Actually, no. My BS radar is going off. Okay. You want to get your ID out of the trunk? Nah, I don't have it. He starts looking around for another story to use, but now I know I'm supposed to stay out of the trunk. He's also not giving me any more information. No ID, then I have to take you in and get you fingerprinted. I'm going to get in that trunk one way or another. He's looking like he's lost. I ask him what's in the trunk, but he's not talking anymore. We pull him out and get him in cuffs. Another officer takes him to get ID through fingerprints. Since his car is expired past 6 months, California laws, we tow the car. In the process of getting ready to tow the car, we need to take a quick inventory. In the trunk was a police uniform with fake patches and a metal badge. No weapon, but a duty belt. He also has stacks of explicit imagery of children. This is a guy who a neighboring city had been looking for months. His MO was to dress as a police officer, talk to kids, and you can figure out the rest. If he just gave me his name, I could have looked up his ID and verified he had one. I'd probably have let him go, but the neighboring city had zero information as to his name. They only had a vague description of the car and the fact he was posing as a police officer. In fact, what he would do is start talking to a kid in the 9 to 12-year-old range, tell him he has to be taken in for questioning, and handcuff the kid and take him to his car. He was a bad dude. So this happened a few years ago. I was patrolling my buddy at night. It was almost the end of our shift. Suddenly, we get an alert that a local nearby gas station had just been robbed, unsuccessfully, and that the suspect was supposed to pass by us in a red car. Indeed, seconds later, we saw a man speeding through the road. Details on the side, we ended up catching him on a dead-end street. When my buddy was handcuffing the suspect, I asked the suspect if he had something to do with the robbery. He repeatedly said, I've never been there. Ask the ginger lady. Turns out the cashier that night was an old lady named Marcy, covering up for her ill daughter, whom would have never been able to identify him since he was wearing a black mask during the robbery, which we never found. Marcy had ginger hair. Fortunately, the suspect was kind enough to inadvertently confess the crime. How could he know the appearance of the cashier if he had never been at the crime scene? The jury thought the same. Fellow officers stopped a car for a turn violation. Guys want to be illegal substance dealer, who we've seen around the bars before. We were talking with him and asked permission to search his car. He agrees. I'm bullcrapping with them about sports and weather, and the officer finds a duffel bag. So I joke and say, nothing in there that's dangerous, right? Like bombs or grenades or explosives. He nods and says, yeah, a bunch of dynamite. I'm waiting for him to laugh or smile or shrug or do something that screams it's a joke. Nothing. I say, I'm going to open the bag and look, okay? Expecting at any moment he will stop me. He doesn't. It was 8 sticks of dynamite he stole from a construction site. Separate story. If he didn't say anything, I would have ignored the bag thinking it was tools. He was getting supplies from an MC to terminate someone. Needless to say, he went to prison for a few years. Pulled a guy over because his car was looking pretty run down. Wanted to lecture him that he shouldn't be driving around at night with only half his lights working. We got out of our car, and I approached the driver window, and he looks at me and says, yeah, all right, I admit it. I smoked some leaf. Alrighty then. Wanted to give him another chance. What? We know your lights are broken. No, I smoked the leaf. Cue the eye roll. Gosh darn it, man. So we parked his car and drove him to have a blood test done. We were already done with our shift for an hour because we waited for a long time for the doc. So when we got out, I was ready to go home. He turns to me and says, I can't call anyone to pick me up. We're all getting in trouble. Good Samaritan kicks in, ends up driving the guy home. He's a chill dude, obviously. I don't know what happened to him afterwards. He probably lost that internship we were talking about. Some idiots from my hometown broke into a few houses in the early 2000s. Among several stolen items was a handheld video camera. They proceeded to record themselves breaking into several more houses and posing back home with their haul. Several of the items, including said camera, ended up at pawn shops. Well, when the battery died, they didn't remove the tape. As is customary, the pawn shop found a compatible charger and watched the recordings. Copies of their fingerprints, IDs, and the video were turned into the police, and these morons went to jail. Almost everything from the videos was recovered from area pawn shops. Not a cop, but I have a buddy that is. Nothing too crazy, but he's had countless moments where he's tried to give people a break, or all they had to do was sit down and be quiet, but they end up talking themselves into jail. Recently had a dude he pulled over that was a bit over the limit for a DUI, but not too much, so he was going to let a friend pick him up instead of arresting him. Guy got to talking and basically revealed driving under the influence was something he did fairly regularly. A single mistake is one thing, but my buddy decided the best chance at getting him to stop would be learning the lesson the hard way. Not a cop. I had a roommate in college that was no friend of mine. He got in a fight at a bar and was kicked out. He tried to go back into the bar and got thrown out again, but a cop happened to be driving by the second time. The cop told him to relax or he was going to be arrested, and he told the cop to arrest him. The cop handcuffs him and puts him in the back of the cop car. Roommate then started banging on the window. Cop then recuffed him with his hands behind his back. Roommate's stupidity carried on for the next couple of months. He was supposed to go to court over the whole thing but didn't show up. Police showed up at his job, cuffed him, and brought him to court. Judge told him he would have just received a slap on the wrist, but he now had to send him to jail for a couple of days. He was scheduled to report to jail a week or two later, and he didn't show up for that either. By this time, he disappeared. I never saw the guy again. Not a cop, but a witness. During college, my friends and I would hang out outside and smoke hookah. Frequently, we would invite strangers who passed by to join, or campus police would casually chat with us as they made their rounds. So, one time, a group of freshmen walked past and asked to join. After about 15 minutes, the campus police car rolls up and the freshmen get visibly nervous. We tell them to calm down. The cops are chill. As soon as the cop gets out of the car, one freshman bolts and he makes it about 20 feet before the cop tackles him. We all clap and heckle the kid. Upon searching him, the cop finds a bunch of leaf. Then he says, "You realize prior to running I had no reason to be suspicious? I just wanted to talk to my friends over there," and points at us. The cop ends up writing a ticket and sends him off. In college, after an early football game, we had a large group at my house. We were planning on partying, but there was a really good game on, so everyone was just sitting around watching the game. We were about 50-50, underage, ages 20 to 22. There were a few people who had beers, but the drinking had not started. People were flowing in steadily, and I guess the neighbors saw the amount of cars and called the cops to file a noise complaint at 7 p.m. There was a knock at the door, and someone said, "Come in." In walks a cop. I surveyed the room to realize everyone who had a beer was over 21, except one. Just as the officer was about to speak, she takes off and dives from the couch to behind the kitchen counter. The cop pauses, shakes his head, said there was a noise complaint, but he had been sitting outside for 10 minutes and hasn't heard a word. Said to enjoy the game, looks at the kitchen, shakes his head again, and walks out. Luckily, I lived in the town next door to the college, or it would have been a rough night. This situation came from a friend of mine. So we lived with 3 other guys in a 4-bedroom apartment. One day, when only one roommate was home, the police came knocking. They asked if they could come in and search for suspected illegal substance usage. Here's where I should mention the roommate who was home was kind of an oblivious shut-in who spent most of his day playing World of Warcraft or Magic the Gathering in his room. So of course he says, "Sure, come on in," having no idea what his roommates have been up to. In room 1, they find nothing, as that was the oblivious guy's room. Room 2, they find a personal bag of leaf. Room 3, they find a pipe. Roommate 3 didn't smoke, but he and roommate 2 played video games a lot, so it belonged to roommate 2. In room 4, they find a possession with intent to distribute giant bag of leaf. Apparently just a crap load. Roommate 2 told me it was the most leaves he'd ever seen in one place. And he was angry because he always bought from someone else. Didn't know his roommate was a dealer. 3 of the 4 get arrested. Only one who didn't was the guy who let them in. My friend was roommate 3. Charges against him got dropped because roommate 2 fessed up to the pipe being his and got a slap on the wrist. Not sure what happened to roommate 4. They never saw him again. Former Walmart employees of Reddit, what are your horror stories? My mom was a manager at Walmart. She told me about this woman who was trying to steal a prepaid phone. When she got caught by security, she used the knife she was attempting to open the plastic packaging with to cut the security dude after cutting herself. She then went on to scream at him that she has an infectious disease and now he's going to have it for trying to stop her. I used to do field service for Walmarts in the Portland, Oregon area. The East Portland stores were especially fun. The Wood Village, Eastport Plaza, and Happy Valley stores are relatively close together, and we techs refer to them as the Gauntlet. The Eastport Plaza store was especially active, and we nicknamed that one the Thunderdome. Every visit, we would witness an arrest or something more exciting or disgusting. Last Christmas, for instance, while Frank Sinatra's version of Mistletoe and Holly was playing, a dude was totally face-planted by some cops after resisting arrest, in the process damaging the automatic doors and knocking over a display. Another time, a tech witnessed the arrest of the hottest-looking naughty worker ever on 82nd Street, being cuffed and stuffed in the parking lot. One day, I arrived at Thunderdome and noticed that I could not get the customer service desk to check in. Several workers were not allowing people to pass, and there was also a number of orange cones marking the restricted area. A quick whiff indicated what my eyes later confirmed. Crap all over the floor. The men's room is right next to the customer service area. Eventually, they had to break out the Zamboni machine to finish cleaning up. I had about 10 registers to work on there that day. They beat the hell out of their equipment in that store, and after 2 hours, I was ready to take a leak and check out. They still weren't letting anybody into the men's room. God only knows what horrors there must have been. Working there as a cashier since October, Christmas Eve rolls around, and thank God I'm not scheduled to work. Cue phone call from the manager asking why I haven't come in yet that day. I'm not on the schedule? Manager. Yes, you are. I'm not coming in. I wasn't on the schedule. Next day I worked was the day after Boxing Day went, and looked at the schedule, and lo and behold, someone wrote that I was supposed to work in pencil. I quit shortly thereafter. I had a coworker call me one morning, and when I answered the phone very sleepily, she just started crying and asked, "You didn't know you were scheduled, did you?" I hadn't been scheduled, but my boss changed the schedule after my previous day of work and didn't inform me. I couldn't get to work that morning because of my lack of transportation, and I had to hang up after a painful conversation with my sobbing coworker. I transferred not long after that since my boss let that happen a few more times. I shouldn't have to wake up at 5 in the morning to call my boss and see if I'm scheduled for the day simply because she changed the printed schedule constantly. You see, coworkers couldn't leave until coverage arrived. If you're the only trained cashier and the next person doesn't show up and no one else on the floor is cashier trained, they want you to stay until the late person shows up. But if they'd already worked 8 hours and covered for 2 additional hours with their coverage not showing up, she was likely to be overworked and at her wit's end only to call and realize no one was coming and she'd have to do a double shift. I worked at Walmart about 13 years ago at one of the few stores left that closed overnight. It was a regular old Walmart, not at all super. I worked overnight stocking. I liked it. I only dealt with customers for a couple hours before the store closed and then just stocked the shelves. I mainly worked in the automotive department, and the nights would go by really fast. I worked with a bunch of people who were related to each other. There was a dad, Steve, his wife's sister, and a stepdaughter who worked there during the day in the jewelry department. Steve stocked the sporting goods department right next to mine. This guy was really gross. He would constantly pop over to my section and ask me if I needed help lifting stuff up onto the overstocked shelves, and he would make comments about how pretty I was and how if he was 10 years younger, he'd date me. Dude was pushing 50 and I was just a 19-year-old girl. I just laughed off his comments, say I didn't need help, and that I was perfectly happy with my boyfriend, thank you. One night, he decided to tell me how big his one-eyed monster was. He relayed a story, a total lie, I'm sure, about how one day he was getting out of the shower and his stepdaughter, who was 17, saw him accidentally and exclaimed about how nice his one-eyed monster was and how she wanted to try it out. I was dumbfounded and I did not know what to say. I just said, "Oh, well, I gotta get back to work," and kind of shuffled away. A week later, he was caught doing the deed with his wife's sister in the bathroom at work. They were both fired, his wife quit, and his stepdaughter continued to work there. Mine isn't as bad as some of those here, but it was its own special kind of awful. I worked on third shift for a summer between college years. The Walmart I was in had about 1 hour's worth of music playing over the speakers all night, playing on a non-stop loop. My sleep habits were already pretty mucked from trying to adjust to third shift, but the music is what really did it. I heard that same music loop over and over again, all shift, 5 days a week. When I left the store, I would still hear it running in my head. Then I started hearing it in my dreams. Then it got so ingrained that I started just dreaming I was working my shift at Walmart. Several days a week, I would have the experience of working an entire 8-hour shift. Then just around quitting time, my alarm clock would go off, and I would wake up and go work an 8-hour shift. I quit a few weeks early at the end of the summer because I was losing my gosh darn mind. I sprained my back moving product in the back. At first I thought it was a pulled muscle, and I walked towards the pharmacy to try and buy a heating pad and some Tylenol. I made it to jewelry, barely keeping conscious from the pain. I asked my coworker to call management and let them know I had hurt myself pretty badly and needed to go to the hospital. Management told her to have me go back to the office to fill out paperwork. I blacked out twice going back and was yelled at for taking so long. I ended up being out for a month and a half for the injury and got a whopping $24 in workman's compensation because the second I got hurt, my hours were reduced to 1 hour a week. I hate Walmart. A friend of mine was working part-time at Walmart. He'd been there for over a year. He was working any and all positions, shifts that they threw at him, so he could try to provide for his wife and unexpected baby. He started to apply for any and all full-time positions as they really needed the benefits. One day, management took him aside and told him this was not the Walmart way, and he needed to make a plan with steps on how to get a particular position. Apparently, anything full-time is not okay. Walmart wants to help you achieve your specific goals, but really Walmart wants to use you as much as they can and break your spirit. Once I had a woman who was giving me a hard time about a coupon that was expired. Coupon people are the worst. She refused to give up. She really wanted that $1 off. My line was getting really long and I was getting really frustrated. So I reached in my pocket and pulled out a $5 and said, "If I give you a $5, will you give up on this coupon?" She got angry and said, "I can't believe you said that to me." She told the CSM, but I didn't get in trouble for it. The amount of times that people ask me why we don't take coupons after they expire is ridiculous. They have a freaking date on them for a reason. I'll start with my grossest. A woman comes in with some underwear and said they didn't fit, and she wanted to return them for cash because she had already bought the correct size elsewhere. She had a receipt and plopped a Walmart bag down on the counter. Inside this bag were 6 crusty, crap-stained underwear that were a biohazard from 6 feet away. Needless to say, I did not touch them. I paged the manager on duty and he tells me to just take them back, despite being very gross. Processed the return and she happily left the store with her $8. Former cart pusher. Had an old lady try to tip me $1 after I helped her bring her newly bought plants or some crap to her car. Told her I couldn't accept it per company policy, and it was only $1, so it wasn't particularly enticing. She then proceeded to roll over in her little scooter mobile and stuff it down the front of my pants. She chuckled dirtily as she rolled away. Yo, Granny is making it rain over here. Look at all those pennies. Just tossing pennies at all of those cart pushers.
I love going to Walmart. I get to see all the chunky hunkies. Here, pennies for everyone.
I worked for Mallwart 11 years ago for a whopping total of 8 months. I worked the overnight shift as an overnight stalker for Department 8, Pets. The store I worked at had just gotten brand new high-rise shelves installed. They were said to be able to hold over a ton. Well, one night after getting all my regular freight stocked and overstock put into the bins, my bosses had me pull 8 pallets of Arm & Hammer cat litter. The boxes had a bonus 10 pounds inside, making them nearly 35 or so pounds apiece. They wanted all of those on the high risers. I asked if they were absolutely sure the shelves would be able to handle all that weight. I threw a crap fit about it because I know I was in the right for being worried. Other department managers who were there also sided with me. They watched me over the next couple of hours as I carefully did my job. As I was putting the final 12 boxes on the bottom shelf, I heard a cracking and tearing sound. And the next thing I know is I'm buried underneath all of the cat litter that had caused the shelves to collapse. Everybody in the store heard it happen, and everybody was explicitly told not to dial 911 or anything. Muck that crap! After getting all my blood cleaned from my face and cuts patched up, I called my uncles, then my girlfriend, who was a lawyer, told her what had just occurred and what the upper management is attempting to do. As of today, I still haven't spent all the money I received as a result of going to court over it. Muck Walmart! I was a department manager in frozen foods. One day, on one of my days off, so I didn't witness this, one of my employees came into work seeming very confused and disoriented. She couldn't remember the date, what day it was. Someone asked her what her name is. She couldn't remember. She clearly had what some would call a very minor case of serious brain damage. The store refused to call 911 and instead called for her mother to pick her up and take her to the hospital. Apparently, something that not everyone appears to be aware of is that if you ask someone, "What is your name?" and they respond, "I don't know," then you need to call for an ambulance. This woman had a blood vessel in her brain that popped. Her head partially exploded. It could have terminated her. And those cheap plastards at Walmart wouldn't call 911. There was also someone in produce who had a heart attack. The store didn't call 911 for him either. One of the other produce associates had to volunteer to take him to the hospital. Walmart is the only place I've ever worked at where I could say they wouldn't care if I passed on right there in the store. And it wouldn't be hyperbole. Muck Walmart. Wow, there definitely is a theme here. That's 2 stories now of people nearly just getting terminated in the store. Is there a rule or something that you just can't call 911? That's insane. Why would they do this? What's wrong with you, Walmart? I was working at Walmart at the beginning of this year. Aside from weird older men hitting on me, it wasn't that bad. A few weeks before the minimum pay was raised, they decided I needed a new position in the store. I was told that I was great with people and need to be out helping customers as opposed to checking. Sales associates get paid less than cashiers. They told me that since it was basically a promotion for me, that they would let me keep the cashier pay instead of lowering me to sales pay. I agreed to the job for that reason, plus new job was full-time. A week later, they take me to sign the papers for the job switch, and the manager gets to the pay part. He says,
I know we told you that we could keep the same pay, but it's just easier to make it the same as everyone else's. Besides, everyone's pay is going up in a few weeks anyway.
So I just agreed, whatever.
still going to be making more. Then my hours start getting cut. I agreed to 40 hours. I was cut down to 25. My manager said he messed up the schedule on accident and would fix it. It continued happening every week. I finally got so frustrated I just left one day and never came back. 4 hours into my first shift, I was facing items on a bottom shelf while a coworker was facing items on the top shelf. She dropped a gallon of Gatorade on my head. Management refused to let me report the injury or leave to seek medical attention. I finished the shift, dazed and in pain. The next day, I found out my skull was broken. Officially, since I was not allowed to report the injury, it didn't happen at work. I rage quit. This happened before I got hired, but I heard enough about it from coworkers. An elderly couple would come in once a week to go shopping. The old man had trouble walking, so he would kiss his wife and go sit in the fitting room area until she was done. One day, they came in and did the little kiss, and he also handed her his wedding ring, like he knew something was about to happen. A couple minutes of sitting there after his wife walked off, the guy collapsed to the floor, and the fitting room ladies called 911. One of the department managers of the time was also a paramedic, so he rushed over. The old guy started to cough up blood, and every available associate had to come and make a wall of people so customers don't see what is going on. All these associates saw and heard the guy choking on his own blood, now coming out of his nose and ears, passing on the floor. They were trying to find his wife, and no one could find her, and the associates had to wait a half an hour for the coroner to get down there and take the body. The associates who saw it still have flashbacks about it. One day, a woman stole a bottle of perfume and took it to the bathroom. She poured it out into her own container and then proceeded to fill the container with her own urine. She then took the bottle up to the returns and tried to return it. To this day, I have no idea why my manager gave her the refund. It was very obvious that the woman urinated in the bottle because it was still warm. A woman steals perfume, returns her own urine, and profits from Walmart. You know, it takes a type of crazy to actually be prepared to do stuff like that. Is that in her agenda? Is that in her calendar, you know? Yes, today is going to be a wonderful day as I'm just going to steal some delectable perfume from Walmart and then just return it for an extra few bucks with my equally as valuable urine. That's a whole nother level of crazy. I warn you, and I warn myself, we are never going to go to Walmart late at night. Just no. Someone left a baby in a stroller just chilling in one of the aisles one night. I was a cashier at the time, so I don't know all of the details, but from what I know, authorities got involved and the guy came back after what we think was at least an hour or two, appearing oblivious to what he did wrong. I don't think he spoke much English, so it was just a confusing situation all around. Thank God for the guy stalking who was looking out. We're lucky it didn't get any worse knowing how crazy people who come through can be, let alone at night. What's weird was this wasn't even brought up again with my coworkers, so I don't recall what ended up happening to the guy. It was just another stupid thing we witnessed. The whole don't call 911 thing was standard also at Target. I worked in the deli and our gloves to clean the slicer went missing one day. They are reinforced to help in case your finger makes contact with the blade, so the blade won't slice through your finger. Well, I told my manager we needed gloves and kept reminding her every day I worked, but she would just reply with, "I've let the e-tail know." One day I'm cleaning the slicer, it's taken apart so it can't open any wider than the locked and closed position. But there's an open spot at the top where the sharpener goes. Anyway, I'm cleaning it and my finger catches the blade right on the tip and it gets cut off. I felt a sting, thought it was minor, and went to the sink. I take off my latex gloves and start rinsing and I see my fingertip is gone, just flat and pouring blood. So I wrapped it in my pure white deli coat and walk out to the deli in the front. I showed the leader on deck for the night and she freaks out, pulls me into the break room and then has somebody take me to the hospital. Some people suggested she call an ambulance after about 20 minutes of me standing at the sink bleeding. Then she pulled in a guy who was shopping that was a part-time firefighter, and he took one look and said, "I should have been at the hospital 30 minutes ago." Crazy. This guy comes in on a busy day, and I start ringing him up for all kinds of stuff from around the store, including the newly released PS2 and GameCube. Yeah, I worked there a lifetime ago. He writes a check, and I proceed to process it in our little machine. It comes back with a suspicious error, so I tell him the machine is acting weird, and outside of earshot, I call a manager over. He starts getting visibly nervous as a few CSMs, cashier managers, come over and inspect the check. They ask him a few questions and take the check and disappear, stating they need to run it on a different register and that there's nothing to worry about and they'll be right back. After a few minutes, he is sweating bullets and eventually starts slowly making his way out of electronics. His pace quickens until he's full on running for the door. I watch him from the register cause frick it, I'm not breaking a sweat for minimum wage, and BAM! Our huge security guy tackles him to the ground, picks him up, and escorts him up front. At this point, I tell a coworker to take over the register, and I head up front to see what else happens. I just had a feeling. I get there to see the guy meet up with the CSMs that took the check, a handful of managers, and a few police. They present the check to him, ask where he got it, and before anyone can react, he lunges forward, grabs the check, and eats it. Dude ate the check. They wrestle with the guy a little and bring him into the back room. Customers and staff alike were staring in disbelief at what had just occurred. I found out later that the guy was traveling from Walmart to Walmart across state borders, passing bogus checks. So, yeah, normal stuff.
Truck drivers, while traveling through the night, what is the creepiest thing you've ever seen? My father was a truck driver in an area of the country known for toxic waste and Superfund sites. He would tell me tales of an oily purple mist or vapor similar to the heat off a road on a hot day, rising off the swamps around the trucking companies at night. A lot of the truckers he worked with would get sick and start vomiting from the vapor. This was back in the 80s and early 90s, before environmentalism really began to make its impact in our area. My dad has been a lifetime truck driver, first a mover, then refrigerated trailers, then freights, where he is now. He has previously stated that he has seen some crazy stuff. Fights, overdoses, etc. So last summer he was driving, somewhere in Virginia. Note that he complained to me and my mom the week before how people in Virginia drive like buttholes. So anyway, he's going down the interstate and sees the flashing lights of a wrecker and a state cop pulled over to assist a broken down truck on the opposite side of the highway. My dad has always been a curious guy, so naturally he slows down 10 miles per hour or so to take a good look at the guy on the other side of the highway and what's going on. Well, then this happens. My dad has always told me if there is a car or any sort of vehicle broken down on the side of the road, get to the farthest lane from them, naturally to give them space to move around their vehicle if they need to inspect it for damage and whatnot. Well, people in Virginia drive like buttholes, so they didn't. Even with a flashing light, the original truck driver who is broken down opens his cab door and begins to climb out of his truck. My dad said he did a little hop off the lowest stair from his truck to the highway. In that instant, this car smashes into the guy, killing him immediately. My dad had to stop and regain his composure because he felt like he would pass out. Now that's across the median and on the other side of the road, so I can only imagine how the wrecker and cop reacted. My dad never likes to talk about it. It brings him to tears thinking about it. He sent a card to the family and offered his condolences, but still to this day, it messes him up more than anything he can recall. The first time I took Highway 90 after a pickup in Del Rio, Texas, heading to another pickup in El Paso the next morning. That is a dark and lonely stretch of road. Was told to look for Martha's lights, but didn't see any and kept trucking. What I did see west of there were these bright lights out in the middle of nowhere. It's pretty sparse out there, so I thought I was coming into a town or something. Nope. As I get closer, I see it's some kind of compound, very well lit with security fences all around and a stubby-looking blimp sitting in there. What the hell? With that much light and fencing, this has to be government. X-Files or some crap going on, I thought. Freaky. Mashed my motor and got the hell out of there. Called a friend of mine the next day that I know has rolled through there before and asked him what he knew about it. Find out it's a border patrol facility, looking for illegals. I guess the unnamed blimp goes up attached to a tether to look for heat signatures or something. My overactive imagination was just going into overdrive, I guess. Stopped listening to Art Bell after that. Tells you how long ago this was. I don't even know what Art Bell is. Was hauling a load from California to Michigan once, and my GPS said the trip would be 2 hours quicker if I took US 50 instead of I-80. I soon learned this was the loneliest road in America. No services or anything at all for hundreds of miles. At 0200 in the morning, I was too tired to keep driving and had to stop on a large shoulder for the night. I was still 200 miles from any services and was thoroughly nervous that night because I've heard stories of truckers getting killed while parked in an isolated area overnight. It was also pitch black and I could hear coyotes while taking a whiz. Luckily, I was undisturbed and continued my trip in the morning. Something else is singing trailers. When I was new to trucking, there was a quiet night while I was in my truck bed and I kept hearing an unusual and consistent creaking sound. Upon inspection, it was the trailer airlines making dull noises. Still can't figure out why they do this and when they do it. Lasts for hours. Another thing, I was driving on the I-10 at night and was around Arizona and California. There was a sandstorm at the time, and at the time, the roads would just disappear for like a mile because it was covered in sand. I was lucky because there were a bunch of guys with ATVs driving around and along the road, so I didn't lose my way. Believe it or not, I actually picked this topic because I liked ice road truckers as a kid. Guy I drove with told me a story about killing a hitchhiker. They were in the desert. It was twilight and the guy was wearing tan clothes. He had a girl with him that he said he'd never forget her screaming after he clipped the guy and sent him flying. He knew the guy was dead because he wasn't bleeding, something I didn't understand at first, but made sense after he told me. When you're dead, your heart stops pumping, so no gushing blood like you might expect. He was a Vietnam War vet, so I figured he has other experiences with this. He even kept driving that night after giving the police report and all the other fallout. He just loved driving that much. I drove third shift long haul for years. Start at 6:00 p.m., run till 8 a.m. Never saw anything close to being called paranormal, but the wrecks I saw daily. Being low light, I'm sure some looked worse when passing. But it's sobering to pass wrecks with multiple ambulances, covered bodies, burnt out cars, multiple fire and police units. Past many a crash in the day. Always seems more dramatic at night. I mean, appropriate lighting kind of does that to any scene regardless of the context. That's literally the entire art of filmmaking, kind of. And naturally, flashing bright lights in the dark scene of a crash or some kind of tragic incident really does bring home how serious it is. Not me, but my brother saw a pale-skinned little girl with matted blonde hair walking down the side of a desolate Texas road, swinging her arms around like Vince McMahon, except leaning forward slightly and walking furiously. Oh, I forgot, she was also wearing a dingy old nightgown. Being the guy he is, he started to pull over to offer her help or a ride, but she turned her head, and it wasn't even a little girl at all, but actually a little person, and stared at him, mouth half open, never slowing her pace or turning away until he floored it and never looked back. He called me right after it happened and was clearly shaken. I don't believe in supernatural anything really, and neither has he ever, but something about this girl shook his conviction. I like to think she was sleepwalking and was tired, but it's pretty tough to write off the opinion of a solid guy I've known my whole life. I was moving heavy equipment from job site to job site, and a lot of the time it was me dropping off a dozer, excavator, etc. Late at night. Pulled up to his side, and as my headlight came across the lot, I was leaving the equipment, and I saw a man with a clown mask and camo clothing on top of the long dumpster, digging through it. I stopped and backed up to put the light back on him as he jumped down the backside of the long dumpster. Talk about looking over my shoulder every 5 seconds while I unchained and got the excavator off the trailer, and I was out. Never did see or hear anything, just assumed some creepy clown was watching me from the woods. I get it. That would be terrible. terrifying to see a man in camouflage and a clown mask lurking in the darkness. I'd probably be thinking, goddamn, time to get the heck out of here. This sounds like a goddamn Scooby-Doo plotline. I can picture it already. The mystery of the camo clown. It's the business owner. The economy's bad. Biden's America. You meddling kids. Bin Man here. I started around 4:30 a.m., was in a pretty remote area, one house every half mile or so, and I saw this dude standing in boxer shorts and boots on, nothing else, holding what looked like a head of a doll. It looked too small to be human. It was creepy as heck. Thankfully, the bin I had to empty was another half mile down the road. Sounds like the opening of some kind of new Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. It didn't happen to me directly, but my uncle was literally abducted while working as a trucker. I'll try to remember the details as best I can. He only told me the story once, then refused to speak about it again. He worked as a trucker his entire adult life, or at least for as long as I was alive. One day, he was up and around Illinois or Indiana area, I think, and it was early evening. He pulled over at a truck stop for a break. He fueled up the truck, then went inside and had dinner. It was one of those with a diner-type place inside. Then took a shower. Point being that he was in there for a little while, 30 to 45 minutes. When he came out to get back in the truck, everything looked normal. But as soon as he opened the door, a guy jumped out from behind the cabin. I think he was hiding between the cabin and the trailer, and pulled a weapon. I think he said it was a gun, but it might have been a knife. Guy orders my uncle to get in the cabin and climb in the back. My uncle drove one of those trucks with the sleeper bed area, the ones you have in the back. Then the guy climbed in after. He told my uncle to lay down on the bed and put his hands behind his back. Then he took some bungee cables my uncle kept in the cabin and tied him up hands and feet. Didn't gag him, as far as I can remember. Then the guy gets in the driver's seat and just starts driving. Uncle said he had no trouble getting the truck going, so he clearly had some experience driving big rigs. From what I remember, he didn't talk to my uncle the whole time. He just drove and would occasionally look back and flash the weapon to remind my uncle that he could mess him up if he wanted. My uncle said he couldn't really see where they were, but he could tell they were on the interstate again. After a long time of driving throughout the night, my uncle mentioned it was probably when the fuel tank was getting low, he pulled over at another truck stop. The guy just looked back at my uncle, seemed to think about something, maybe whether or not to untie him, then just got out, shut the door, and left. My uncle said he laid there for a while, scared he was getting fuel or food or something, then coming back, but he never did. After several more hours, another truck pulled into the spot next to him, and my uncle yelled for help until the guy opened the door and found him. Pretty sure they called the police. My uncle never directly said, but I can't fathom that they wouldn't. But they never found the guy as far as my uncle knew. Turns out that he drove him to the next state over and stopped when he was at 10% of a tank left, and it looks like he left on foot. Sounds like it was fortunate that no one else was fueling at the time, or he might have taken their truck too. After that, I want to say my uncle got like a month off from work to go home and spend time with his family. He actually went back to work as a trucker for a few years more, but he would never do long-haul trips anymore, and he pretty much retired the second he had enough years in. It was scary listening to that story, not only because it's messed up circumstances, but also because my uncle was a pretty tough dude, and you could just see in his eyes that this thing still haunted him. He did seem extremely grateful, though, that the guy didn't actually hurt him. My cousin was 1 year old at the time, and was my uncle's only kid. I guess the moral of the story is, be freaking careful, everyone. There's some messed up people in this world. They are right, the world is not just sunshine, rainbows, and lollipops. There are lots of people who will want to hurt you for any reason all over the place. So my stepfather was a truck driver for 30 years. He stopped driving after a particularly windy night. A guy on a motorcycle was riding too close to the side of his trailer, and I guess the wind blew and he got pulled off his bike under the wheels, and he always told me not to ride my bike next to a truck, because they create whirlwind, and without those side barriers you could get pulled under. He said he saw the bike swerve off into the median, and that's how he knew. He hit the bottle pretty hard after that, and never was quite the same. I have had to reread this several times over because they have refused to use any semblance of punctuation whatsoever in this entire bit of writing, and it is maddening.
I'm not exactly what you'd call a truck driver, but my uncle used to have a small fleet, and sometimes he'd pay me to recover a truck when a driver got fired or quit in the middle of a hole. By far the creepiest thing that ever happened to me was when I recovered a truck outside of Detroit. The driver tried to buy crank from an undercover cop and was fired, and my uncle flew me up there to deliver the load and deadhead back to Chicago. Anyway, it's pretty late when I get in, and even later when I get to the truck stop the rig is parked at. So after I called my uncle to let him know I was on site and the cargo was secure, and made sure everything was in working order, I figured I'd catch some sleep and head out first thing in the morning. As soon as I get settled into the rack, I hear this tap, tap, tap on the drive side window. So I unbutt the bunk and slide into the seat, where I found myself face to face with this beat up looking black lady. She goes, "You looking for some company?" Now, I've never had the dubious pleasure of spending some quality time with a lizard before, and I wasn't about to start, but I had dealt with them before, and frequently a no thanks doesn't get the point across. So I'm all, "No, get your butt off my truck and leave me alone." She looks me dead in the eye and says, "Honey, I ain't on your truck," and turned to walk away. Sure enough, she hadn't been standing on my truck. She was just like 7 feet tall and wearing platforms. Well, at that point, what are the platforms even for? A few years back, I pulled into an empty rest area up near Cadillac in Michigan, around 3 a.m. It was the middle of February, and there was a few inches of snow on the ground, and I had to trudge a quarter of a mile from the truck lot to a pavilion, which is no fun. On the way back to the truck, I looked to my right and realized I'm not alone. In fact, I'm equidistant from my truck and a bobcat the size of a large dog that's watching me intently. I instantly freeze in my tracks, and it takes a few steps towards me before stopping as well. Now, I have no idea what to do about a bobcat, but I figure he can definitely beat me to the truck, especially given the terrain. I don't even know if they're dangerous to humans, but I've played some Red Dead Redemption in my time, and I'm not happy about the situation. I turn full face to it and start backing toward the truck, all the while waving my arms and bellowing at it, trying to drive it away. It's not very promising because it keeps taking a few steps towards me and stopping. About this time, a pair of headlights flash over the lot and a minivan pulls into the lot, completely oblivious to the National Geographic event taking place. I start yelling as loud as I can. I manage to alert the guy driving it that there's a crazy person wandering around. He starts his vehicle up again, preparing for flight, and as he backs out, his lights hit the bobcat and it takes off into the trees again. I make a run for the truck. The van drives off into the night, and thus ended probably the 4th most dangerous encounter I've had in Michigan. Why even lie about there being a crazy person wandering around? I'd be like, "Hey, honk at this goddamn bobcat, run it over if you have to, it's intimidating me." Driving between Illinois and Wisconsin last year around 2 a.m., suddenly my headlights illuminate the highway ahead of me, and the road is covered with many large splotches of freshly deposited blood and unrecognizable tatters of flesh. This was like something out of Clive Barker's Nightmares. I can only guess that a semi must have smashed into a deer at highway speeds and just obliterated the poor beast. Yeah, I'm a paramedic and drive through the night. One time I was going through an alleyway at like 4 a.m. looking for someone who overdosed and found 2 people shooting up on a mattress surrounded by human feces, and the ground was moving because it was all rats scattering at the side of the ambulance lights. This one isn't about truckers, but I just wanted to let you all know that this is the endpoint for people that do hardcore drugs on the regular and don't know how to control themselves. Don't do drugs, kids. Went with my grandpa from Fresno, California to someplace in Death Valley. We were in the middle of nowhere between towns in the California deserts. I wasn't paying much attention to the road at the moment, and suddenly the whole rig swerved hard. I figured it was an animal of some sort, but no. The sewed mirrors showed a woman wearing some sort of long flowing dress. We were both confused as there were no cars parked anywhere. How she got there and what happened to her, we'll never know. Yes, we did report it to the police. "Oh, lady of the desert with your long black flowing skirt, I don't know where you're going, why you're here, or what is worse." My grandfather was a truck driver at a lumber yard for about 25 years after World War II. He once told a story about how he and a co-worker both left at the same time from the yard. My grandfather would often go first, and the others would follow, but the other guy insisted on taking the lead. So they're driving on the highway, full speed, and his co-worker gets cut off by a car that just switched lanes without looking. He slams on the brakes. My grandfather noted this, and being so close behind, tapped the brakes and was able to do an emergency slide into the left lane without slamming into anyone. The car was rear-ended by the truck. My grandfather pulled over and came running back, only to find that the contents of the load, tons of lumber,
shifted forward during the hard brake and destroyed the cab, decapitating his friend in the process. While my grandfather was no stranger to such sights in the war, especially as someone who fought on islands in the Pacific, he said this was especially tough on him, since when you're in war, you prepare yourself for this kind of thing. You don't expect something so gruesome in civilian life. Trucker here. Creepiest thing would have to be wind, to be honest. Driving down the road and you can't hear it, and I couldn't feel it in my truck. However, the truck in front of me seemed to lift up and just flip on its side. It seemed like it was out of nowhere. I guess it isn't that creepy, but when you're following and the truck in front of you seems to float up and onto its side, it is a little concerning. The most scared I have ever been was going over Donner Pass one night in late April. I had checked the weather reports and the only concern was supposed to be light snow flurries at the highest elevations. CA will issue mandatory restrictions indicating that you have to put chains on your tires. So I checked the CA.website and no restrictions were called for. I went through the inspection station at Truckee and they were asking if we had chains on the truck, but still no call to put them on. About 10 miles up the road, the sky opened up into the worst whiteout blizzard I have ever been in. I could barely see 50 feet in front of me, and there had been other trucks ahead of me, but I lost sight of his light completely. I could see his tracks in the snow. I slowed down to about 20 miles per hour. Then, just to make it worse, the wind was blowing and the snow was swirling in all directions, and I began to experience a strange vertigo, like I was flying and tumbling in the air. I had to glue my line of sight on those tracks in front of me and hope that guy did not drive off the road. I made it. Only lasted about 30 miles and it turned into heavy rain. I told my dispatcher if I ever had to go through there again at night and any snow was forecast, I was going to shut down until daylight. See, this was the sort of thing I wanted to watch Ice Road Truckers for, but obviously when you get down to it and in the shoes of the person driving, it's like, hell no, I don't want to be in this situation. I never want to be in that situation again. Just a casual trucker here. Can't say I've seen anything that I would consider paranormal, creepy, although when I started, I always thought I would get fortunate enough that some girls would flash me or something. That's never happened. But I have seen like 4 dudes jerking off. Sometimes, my friend, that is simply the way that life goes. We can't expect everything that we want to happen in life, even if it's as mundane and simple as a girl flashing you while you're on the road. And I'm sorry for that. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Linked in the description below.